privacy is by far the most important technical problem to solve for Bitcoin.
I do think that is the most important problem to solve today. Privacy is a human right, and we should, articulate that clearly. We're not talking about criminals and terrorists. Why do you have curtains on your windows?
Why do you wear clothes?
You have nothing to hide.
It's this whole idea of, you can't trust people with freedom. Right? You give people freedom, they're going to do bad things. So how do we remedy that? We need to put people in power. Right? Your fundamental axiom is you can't trust people.
Yep.
How is putting people on top of people going to solve that problem?
You can actually just lock Bitcoin for 500 years and it's trivial. Perhaps that could allow us to underwrite multi-generational projects. There's the Qatar Depression Project, a plan to flood part of Egypt where nobody lives and there's no wildlife at all, with some Mediterranean seawater and create an extension of a Mediterranean climate. Maybe the reason we're all going crazy down here is because we've lost our frontier.
Lost the frontier.
There's nowhere to go.
Do you consider cyberspace to be a frontier?
No, I think it needs to be physical. You have to be able to go there.
Yeah.
In a very literal sense.
If these AIs are going to have agency, they're going to need to be able to move purchasing power or energy between them. Otherwise, you don't really have agency.
Could you, as sort of an entity, just continue operating in the economy after you die indefinitely?
So you have this interesting view. I mean, I think a lot of people perhaps have this view, but you might have some unique perspectives on it, that privacy is by far the most important technical problem to solve for Bitcoin.
Today, I do think that is the most important problem to solve today. Yeah, absolutely.
Can you specify, as you elaborate on that, can you specify if you think this needs to be solved at layer 1 or layer 2+?
I think layer 1 would be much better, and there are some Bitcoin improvement proposals. I think silent payments may help a lot. I think layer 1 privacy is extremely important, and I was thinking about this because I was thinking about how Bitcoiners like to talk about how Bitcoin enables final settlement. And it's actually, a revolution. I work in a space where we're bridging fiat to Bitcoin. So I see every day how fiat is reversible and very unstable, you could say, and Bitcoin is very solid. And so the question is, how solid is that? I read an article by Patrick McKenzie, who's a big payments thinker and innovator, who talks about how final settlement is a socio-legal construct, doesn't actually exist. And that blew my mind. What he means by that is, I think he goes through an argument, but he sums it up by saying, if you and the United States government disagree on whether a transaction is final, you are wrong. Right? In other words, the instrumentalities of the state can be used to reverse a transaction that was done in Bitcoin. If the parties that were party to the transaction are known, then
that's a big if right there. If they're not,
well, that's the issue.
Yeah.
Right? So if the parties involved in transaction are known, then one or both of them can be pressured through coercive force to reverse that transaction, and it doesn't have to be reversed on the blockchain.
Right.
It could be reversed through other means.
Yeah.
Property could be confiscated. Basically, it comes down to whether you are willing to be put in a cage over your transaction. And so actually none of the Bitcoin transactions that are not private are final, I don't think. I can't remember the specifics, but a few years ago, there was a case where I think it was like many millions of dollars were transferred in a Bitcoin transaction, which was like $6 million. And over a decade later, the legal process had played out, and these people were directed by a judge to reverse that transaction. So if you do not have privacy, you don't have finality. And I think Bitcoiners, frankly, can get a little bit dogmatic and even overly confident about, their faith in the irreversibility of a Bitcoin transaction. Sure, you can't reverse it on the blockchain. It's not so simple unless you know the parties involved. If you don't know the parties involved, then it truly is final.
Yeah, so that's what I was going to go with, is that the final settlement comes down to irreversibility, which is factually true on Bitcoin. But once you get beyond Bitcoin into the legal system, you're saying that coercive means can be brought to bear to induce people to, doesn't necessarily, it's not even a reversal necessarily at that point. It's like a remedy, right? If the transaction was made in a way that's deemed to be not legal, and they'll either seize your property or whatever else they would do to you. Like, it's not necessarily that transaction gets reversed on Bitcoin. It could be that they seize your house, right? To make it,
or they tell you, do reverse that transaction on Bitcoin, please.
Or else,
broadcast a message, and have it mined. I mean, the thing is, life is messy, and society, and Bitcoin is just a part of society. It's a tool that we use within the context of a very uncertain and messy world.
Yeah.
You think that gold enables, transaction finality, but then you tell the story of how, when France got word that we may default on our dollar being pegged to gold, they sent an aircraft carrier into New York Harbor to go get their gold. Okay, well, they reversed that transaction. That's a transaction reversal on gold. So all of these things matter, and they play into the overall experience of using a form of money. And I think privacy is extremely important. Privacy on chain. You can use other technologies like for example, Lightning is interesting. Lightning gives you more privacy, but it gives you more privacy at the expense of less certainty about on-chain finality, right? You could have your channel closed. So there's a trade-off there, which is interesting. I wonder if that trade-off holds up, in other contexts.
Sorry, that was my question. My understanding about privacy at layer 1 is that there was a fundamental trade-off between perfect privacy and supply, a hard supply cap.
Explain.
And again, I'm not technically proficient here, but as I've read, that to audit the total Bitcoin supply and verify that there's a fixed supply of 21 million, that somehow you have to trade off perfect privacy to have that level of auditability. And I didn't know that had been solved, but it sounds like there maybe are inroads towards that solution with, you mentioned silent payments, which I'm not familiar with.
Yes, and I'm out of my depth here, but silent payments would enable you to provide a payment address without the person paying you knowing what other transactions were associated with you. And again, I don't want to misspeak, so all I can say about silent payments, but I did read it a while back, and it struck me as a good thing to do. And I think there's actually been some inroads. There are people working on an implementation of that. It's probably months away from even reaching the point that it's testable. But I guess that's what worries me about Bitcoin. It's like we've built up this record of transactions that are very public, and if you're building with the eventuality of building something that's robust and can last for centuries, I think we need to move as fast as possible on privacy.
Why do you think layer 1 is so important versus doing it at layer 2 plus? Is it because of the trade-offs that have to be made there?
Well, I mean, if you are talking about transactions on layer 1, if those aren't private, then couldn't those parties be pressured by the powers that be?
Yeah, always if they're identifiable.
Right.
And this would get back to, your privacy hygiene at layer 1. And clearly that would be at a premium in certain coercive circumstances. But I don't know enough about Lightning either, but I was also under the impression that if you transacted through Lightning enough, that you could actually use that as a tool for obfuscating some of your layer 1 exposure as far as breaking your pseudonymity.
I don't know about that. It's very possible.
Yeah.
But I mean, aren't you known to the Lightning? I mean, aren't the Lightning node operators known to
perhaps I don't know.
To layer 1? Okay.
I mean,
at some point, if you're transacting on a public blockchain, it's there are heuristics. I know these things are not perfect, but again, I just wonder if with enough motivation, and enough pressure.
Yeah.
Because I've seen this before in the fiat world. Pressure can be exerted to, get people to admit who they were working with or what they were doing, and eventually, the truth comes out about who was doing what. If we're prosecuting crime, that's great, but obviously, privacy is a human right, and we should articulate that clearly. We're not talking about criminals and terrorists and everything that are using Bitcoin. We're talking about privacy being a human right. The classic sort of example that people give about why privacy is not inherently suspect is you ask, well, why do you have curtains on your living room windows, right?
Yeah, I always say, why do you wear clothes?
Why do you wear clothes, right? Yeah, or why do you have curtains on your windows? It's like you have nothing to hide. You're just eating supper in your dining room. Why would you want to close your curtains? And of course, it's because of privacy. And if you think about it, United States Constitution protects the right to assemble, the right to associate with other people, and it's not spoken, but the inverse is also a natural right, the right to not associate. Right? I don't want to associate with the people who are trying to find out about my transactions or about what I'm doing. Yeah. And that's something I'm allowed to withdraw from other people. I think that's maybe underappreciated too, that that we as creatures, we like to choose who we associate with. And it really is a violation of our rights to force us to be watched, which is a form of association.
I completely agree. I mean, for me, it's such an essential aspect of human freedom is the ability to selectively reveal or conceal yourself. If you can't do that, well, then you're missing something pretty important to human freedom, right? It doesn't harm anyone for you to reveal or conceal yourself in most cases. Maybe revealing in certain circumstances is not something that people necessarily want, right?
Yeah.
That's why we wear clothes. But to have that option, specifically, I think for me, it really comes down to a private property issue. It's like, if you're on my property, well, then I can tell you to leave my property and dissociate, right? And it gets obviously much more muddied in these digital commons that we're all participating in. And we're like, oh, well, whose property is that? If I post on Twitter, is it mine? Is it Twitter's?
Yeah.
There's a lot of kind of unsolved legal issue there. But I think philosophically that privacy is very much essential to human freedom. If you don't have that ability to selectively reveal and conceal yourself, then you're not free.
And I think we've made a lot of progress as a culture to kind of accept that. And if you think back to the 90s when encrypted communications was just getting going, that wasn't it. There was a public debate about whether you should be allowed to speak privately to other people online, which today blows our minds because it's very obvious that we've all accepted that that's standard. And we're there with money now because and the arguments are the same too, because it was always about, well, if you don't know what people are saying, then how do you know that they're not conspiring to overthrow the government or do terrorism?
Right.
And there was this they even, it's funny because I remember this as a kid. There was even an initiative to put a backdoor hardware chip in every mobile communications device. It was called a clipper chip. So for the people that know about it, they're like, you're treading over well-worn ground. But I think a lot of people have not even heard of this thing. Yeah. And there were congressional hearings about whether they were going to put this hardware chip into every single cell phone so the government could listen, because it was just seen as a national security risk to avoid, to prevent, to allow people to communicate privately. Meanwhile, you're allowed to have a conversation in your own house without being listened to. It's a fundamental contradiction. And it's funny that we're kind of there with money where it's like, I think there are a lot of people in positions to regulate or to enforce laws or to make decisions about how to handle financial transactions who they wouldn't dare say that cash is dangerous and we need to completely remove cash because it would be so politically unpopular. But then they'll also turn around and say unmonitored financial transactions are too risky to allow.
Yeah, that's insane.
And so it's like, I think you just kind of have to come clean and choose one or the other. You can't speak out of both sides of your mouth. Like, you know, either advocate for eliminating physical cash, or accept that that financial privacy is why people like cash and why they wouldn't want you to take it away, and then sort of build regulation around that core principle.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I would take this all the way down to just the fundamental absurdity of governance by fiat. That it's this whole idea of, oh, well, you can't trust people with freedom, right? You give people freedom, they're going to do bad things. So how do we remedy that? We need to put people in power above those people that have freedom to make sure they don't do bad things. It's like, okay, well, you couldn't trust people with freedom, so you decided to remedy that by putting people in power above them. How do you trust the people in power? Right? Your fundamental axiom is you can't trust people.
Yeah.
How is putting people on top of people going to solve that problem? It's absurd, in my opinion. And this is the cultural hypnosis we're all under. It's like, oh, we think we can pass a law or install someone else in office or pass a new regulation and we're going to solve a problem, but it fundamentally doesn't work. There's a schism at the basis of all social organization, and it's this idea that some people are in power and some people are being, what would be the politically appropriate term here, governed, I guess.
Yeah.
When in reality, it's oppression, right? It's oppression and exploitation all the way down.
Yeah, and there's always this, it's very convenient to attack, and I don't mean that in a pejorative way, but if you're trying to enforce some kind of rule, it's always convenient to attack the channel through which the bad behavior is moving, as opposed to the bad behavior itself.
Right.
And so you see that with, for example, the encryption debate. We need to be able to listen for things. We're not going to go, you know, we're not going to set up it's much more expensive and complicated to go and find the individuals responsible for the bad behavior than it is to simply listen to everybody's messages. And you see this also with transactions and payments. You see this with things like hate speech, free speech, right? It's easier to, rather than prosecuting the crimes, it's easier to just cut off the communication channels. And so that's where we got with money, with SWIFT and with the banking system, where it just became an extension of the state. Our payment networks are an extension of the state.
Of course.
And that's why Bitcoin privacy is so important, so that Bitcoin doesn't become that.
Yeah. The banking system has been deputized by the state to do its dirty work, for sure. I think there's also this deep confusion where people are ascribing morality to a tool. You know, it's like, oh, you know, gangster A stabs citizen 1 to death. Let's ban knives.
Yes,
you
I
know,
saw that.
it's like
that's going on right now. Are you talking about what's going on in
no,
the
no.
UK?
I actually was just using a hypothetical situation,
so
but I'm sure it's probably going on in England or some.
It was a couple of weeks ago. I saw this thing go by where there were some people of you know, prominence in the UK saying that they were going to possibly prevent pointy kitchen knives. It was a public service thing, being like, actually, if you think about it, you don't need a pointy knife to cut your onions. It can be rounded, so maybe we should just legislate away pointy knives.
It's fucking crazy, man.
Again, you can always. It's easier to attack the law-abiding people that are in the middle, that are handing things off.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like they're building businesses or transmitting payments or communicating. It's easier to attack those people.
But it's just a category error when you're blaming the tool rather than the wielder of the tool.
It's
the morality is in the wielder, obviously. He's the one that has the agency. Right? Same with gun control. It's like guns don't kill people. Gunmen do.
Of course. And to the extent that people use guns to kill people, there's other problems that we should probably interrogate there.
Yes. But I think to your point, that's more complex and costly and difficult. So we just go with this blunt, broad strokes approach of, let's just ban all the guns and ban all the knives and ban all the pokey things while we're at it. All the toothpicks, you know, pencils.
You end up in a padded room.
Yes.
Everybody gets their padded room.
We're all bubble boys and girls.
Yeah.
In Bitcoin, we often dream about the idea of forming citadels, which are independent, self-sovereign communities that have their own energy, food, and water resources. Today, that dream is becoming a reality at the farm at Okefenokee. The farm is a 705-acre regenerative agriculture community located at the Florida-Georgia line near Folkston, Georgia. The farm is known as the healthiest place on earth, and it includes orchards, organic standing gardens, regenerative animal pastures, berry fields, and much, much more. Today, the farm features 25 custom-built cabins and has plans to construct 225 more in the years ahead. The farm has its own food, energy, and water sources and is completely off-grid. So if you're looking to join a Citadel community comprised of sovereign individuals, then go to okefarm.com today to learn more about membership. Make sure to tell them that I sent you for a $21,000 discount on custom cabin pricing. Again, that's okefarm.com to learn more about joining this revolutionary regenerative agriculture community. iCoin Technology has released a slick new hardware wallet. It looks like a mini iPhone with a high-res 3-inch touchscreen and camera on it. The device has no Wi-Fi, no cellular connection, and no GPS. It is an air-gapped hardware wallet which uses QR codes and a camera to communicate with the Bitcoin network. It has a built-in camera which is required for air-gap operation, and it has an optional Bluetooth compatibility. It's really a brand new user interface and user experience for a Bitcoin hardware wallet. iCoin makes self-custody accessible, easy to use, and non-intimidating. It even comes with an optional custom iCoin thermal printer so you can print out the private key and its associated QR code when you're setting up the wallet. This makes setup quick and simple. Also, it is easy to restore the wallet just by reading the seed phrase QR code with the wallet camera. And as we always talk about on this show, the only way you can truly own your Bitcoin is by having it in self-custody. So you need a device like the iCoin wallet to truly own your Bitcoin. So go to iCointechnology.com/breedlove today for 30% off the purchase of this sleek new hardware wallet. Again, that's iCointechnology.com/breedlove. You mentioned silent payments, but what about what I was thinking about when you first brought that up is, okay, Bitcoin transactions lack finality to the extent that the counterparties are identifiable. What about CoinJoins and other mixers, things that used to break that pseudonymity? Or I'm sorry, break people's traceability.
I think it's great. I mean, there was a movement a few years ago. I remember this was maybe right when I started working in Bitcoin, where some of the larger Bitcoin companies were talking about CoinJoin by default. That should just be, and that was a sort of an extension of what we had learned from the 90s, where you encrypt by default all your communications, and therefore you have critical mass, and it becomes so prominent that the observation that a message is encrypted isn't suspicious. And so the idea is you have to have like enough CoinJoin. That's just the default way that people interact. And I don't know what happened there. I mean, we know the story of Samurai, obviously, and that was centralized. So that was the party was known, so it was attacked. And I know that there are these decentralized CoinJoin technologies. I don't know much about them. I think at some point in the previous administration, with the fall of FTX and everything, again, the personalities that had been speaking about that probably rightfully worried for their personal freedom and just decided to back off. So again, this is how Bitcoiners get into trouble, where they get over their skis with things and they say because something's technically possible, everything's going to be fine. Here's another mystery. Actually, I'm curious what you think about this. So for all the people that say Bitcoin is unstoppable, okay, So I remember the early days of Uber. Uber was awesome in the early days. Okay. It was like magic. You open the app, you see all these cars crawling around you, you click. And I remember because I was traveling every single week. I lived in LA and I traveled to San Jose for work. So I did a lot of Uber and I couldn't believe it. It was like from my place in the Valley to LAX, it was like $13. And it was like fast. They showed up all good. It was a breakthrough technology. And then something happened. I don't know what, but I know that there were lawsuits and there was like legislation and there was taxi medallions and all this stuff. Okay. And not to call out Uber, but like, it's not as good as it used to be. I mean, it's not even close. And then it's like, well, no one can stop you from making an app, making a website that basically does that, where you just exchange cash to anonymous drivers. And you could build a reputation system around that and you could anonymize everybody. And like, you can't stop that. Nobody can stop, if I want to pay you $5 to drive me to the airport, nobody can stop it. It's like, well, maybe that's theoretically true, but it doesn't happen. Why does it not happen? I mean, there's just so many other things that go into that. And it's just not worth the risk of being like, well, you're the one that built this. What are you trying to do? Or something, And so that's just like, I think about that a lot. Cause it's like, why does that exist? Why does decentralized Uber not exist?
Well, first of all, that it would have to be built on Bitcoin, in my opinion, because that's the only decentralized money that there actually is, digital money that there actually is. Gold is decentralized physical money, but Bitcoin's decentralized digital money. I can't claim that I know the answer to that question, but my assumption again would be back to Lightning Network and other layer 2 technologies just being young.
But you could use cash though. I'm just saying, like, why not? It's just an example of like the quote unquote unstoppability that technology brings is not. It doesn't. If the friction is high enough to actually implementing it, it's just not going to happen.
I think the physical cash introduces risk to that model though, because then there's seizable cash in the transaction, whereas if it's facilitated by Bitcoin, that was one of the big conveniences of Uber, right? Is like you didn't have to sit there and pay the driver at the end of the ride.
Sure. Okay, that makes sense.
You didn't have to handle cash. You didn't have to swipe a card. So there's a time savings, obviously. But there's also a risk mitigation. So I don't know why, but the way you described that sounded to me like a Lightning Network-based application could do that at some point. You know, I don't know what level of network density needs to be achieved or what other features Lightning Network needs to support. But in theory, again, based on my limited knowledge of this, it sounds like that would be possible.
Yeah, that makes sense. I guess the friction of payment is a big problem. I mean, payment friction holds us back so much across entrepreneurship and innovation across the whole economy. Sometimes when you stop to think like how much we pay in time and lost money to the frictions associated with payment, it's crazy. Yeah,
and it's very wasteful, obviously, right? Because it's all sunk costs, transactional costs, basically.
Yeah, people think about, it's one of the things that normies are concerned about with Bitcoin is fraud. They're like, well, if you can't reverse it, what if there's fraud, right? But it's like, because the company I work for, Coinbits, we deal with fiat fraud. So that's like where you can reverse things and everything's infinitely reversible. And that's that has a whole set of problems that actually makes everything more expensive and complicated and less stable. And so there's a flip side there that I don't think people appreciate. The convenience of being able to like reverse a transaction that's fraudulent, they pay for in their own potential. Like ultimately the potential of the entire economy, it's like held back by this dead weight.
Yeah, it's probably averaging 2 to 3% merchant processing fees across all credit card, debit card transactions. And a lot of that revenue goes to supporting all the chargebacks and the back and forths and the litigation. Even, I'm not even sure how deep it goes, but there's a whole quagmire behind the idea of reversible transactions that most consumers don't see. Like they might deal with a chargeback here and there, but there's a vast volume of this going on all the time. And it's all a deadweight loss on the entire network.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. The other thing, yeah, so it's a good point that payment frictions have been problematic for a long time, but it's like there's a trade-off we're navigating there. We want high frequency transactions so we can trade very fast and, with low friction. But then you also want finality of settlement, which used to mean you needed to actually transport physical gold, right? So the settling in physical gold is what inhibited high frequency transactions. So that's why we switched to gold-backed currencies, which of course introduced the man in the middle problem.
Yes.
So we're trying to reduce the frictions to exchange, but in doing so, we eliminated transaction finality, or at least delayed it significantly, right? We had deferred settlement.
Yeah.
And then that created a bunch of fraud in the system too. So it's like, when you look at it that way, it really gives you an appreciation for Bitcoin, that
Absolutely.
it can do high frequency final settlement. Obviously, it needs an augmentation like Lightning Network, et cetera, to come online and really work. But when it does work, in theory, again, like that's going to be a really beautiful system because you get the best of both worlds.
Yeah. Lynn Alden writes about this in Broken Money, about how electronic communication, starting with the telegraph, it made it so fast to transact as long as you could use credit, that it was just the cost benefit of, gold's final, it's better. Well, I know, but the throughput of transactions is so much higher if we can just use credit and trust each other more, that it just killed the gold system, and rightfully so. And we're richer for it. So it's not like, it was progress at the time is the point. And now we have Bitcoin, which can kind of do both. High frequency final settlement. Yeah. I love that term. I can't believe you just said it, because I've been thinking about that exact phrase in these last few days as I think about AI as well.
Yeah.
Because with agentic AI, with agents that are able to move autonomously, like through the economy, and make their own decisions about how to spend resources, they're going to need a mechanism of final settlement, and they will need it to be very, very high frequency. And I think, like you said, I think Lightning or something like it will be required. Even if, anyway, we can it could be layer 3, it could be layer 4, but eventually you have to settle up into Bitcoin, because it's really the only digital bearer asset.
Yes.
And you need it to be a bearer asset. You can't have it be another form of credit.
Yeah, absolutely. And the other thing is the transaction fees need to be infinitesimally small, right? Because if these AIs are, well, to the extent they're going to have agency, right, they're going to need to be able to move purchasing power or energy between them. Otherwise, you don't really have agency. It's like how can an agent have agency if it can't transmit actual substance, right? Energy.
Yeah.
It almost gives, like, skin in the game is the term that comes to mind. It's like it actually there are consequences to the decisions the AI is making when it transmits units of money, right? And so how could you possibly do that on fiat rails? Because, again, the transaction fee is 2-3%. Well, if you're doing that frequently, what do you need? 30 to 50 transactions before you've eaten up the whole sum in transaction fees.
Yes.
And so you need something like Lightning Network, which has very tiny transaction fees relative to the value moved, so that you can move something at high frequency and not eat up the principal in transaction fees.
Yeah. I like the way you're explaining that agency requires access to payment. I think there's something very profound and fundamental about that.
It gives it a realness. I was like, what?
Right. Well, so what is economic behavior? We're coordinating the expenditure of resources, right?
Mm-hmm.
So AI, an agent that is even just answering a query, it's expending energy resources and expending compute cycles. And you pay for it in a monthly subscription. Yeah. So you batch. So everything's batched.
Right.
Because we don't have high frequency, we don't have granular payments.
Yes.
This was the same in content. I used to work in
batched instead of just in time, right?
Yeah.
Where it's like the amount of compute the query requires is what you're paying for via microtransaction.
Yes.
That would be a much more continuous billing model for these LLMs.
Yeah. And that's what and in content, it's about royalties as opposed to energy expenditure, but it's kind of the same thing. And I really love what some of the guys in that space are doing with streaming sats, because, why do we have, okay, back up. Why is the internet such a hellscape? Like, why is it designed as literally to attack your brain and make you miserable? I think it has to do with the lack of high frequency final settlement.
For sure.
Because you have to batch payments in order for the payment fees to not kill your business model.
Yeah.
Okay. And that has to do with the lack of final settlement. Okay. So we've established that. So you pay a certain number of dollars per month to get access to a library of content. And then that way, whether you use a lot or a little, it's not exact. They just kind of average it and figure out how much it costs to serve up content per user, and then figure out how much money they have to make and how much they have to charge. But what that does is it leads to an advertising model, right?
Yes,
so
exactly.
so you have to monetize people's attention because you can't monetize their wallets.
That's why people are not the users, they are the product in this paradigm, because you're selling their attention.
Yeah.
Advertisers are the customers. The users are the product. The user's attention is the product being sold to the advertisers.
Correct. Well, and that's the free model. And so I guess subscriptions is one step better because you have the end user paying instead of in lieu of advertising. But yes, the free. So let's talk about free content. So yeah, you have to batch, you invert the user, the advertiser becomes the customer, and you sell ads for, you sell ad inventory for millions of dollars. And so those transactions are even cheaper to transmit, right? Because they're so high volume, and then you sell people's brain cycles to advertisers. And I mean, it sounds really optimistic, but like imagine that sat streaming could finally change that, and you really just pay for what you use. And then in AI, same thing. You send out a query, and you can trade sats for compute cycles in the moment.
Right.
And then that agent can go and take those sats and get other agents or other people to do things for it.
Yes.
And the friction in trade, communication, like information, but also physical things, becomes so low that everything becomes much more efficient. And I think it's probably more than a few percentage points.
Yeah. I mean, you get this maybe like almost a universal bilateral symmetry, right? Where as information's moving one direction, money's moving the other. And it can flip too, right? So if you're asking the LLM a question, maybe you're paying it some amount of sats for the complexity of that compute, and then maybe the LLM in some applications is going to ask you questions back, and it would pay you, right, to get your answer. Who knows?
Yeah.
So, or between AIs, again, as we said earlier. So this idea, like, it's almost like the unification of, and Naval said this years ago, right, that with Bitcoin, mathematics, speech, and money are now the same thing. It's like speech, information, and money, energy, purchasing power have now somehow become unified in this new paradigm. And that's a lot to absorb. Like, you still don't necessarily understand what all that means, but I feel like we're starting to flirt with it as we're talking about these different possible use cases.
Yep. Yeah. And we won't know. It's fascinating to see how fast AI is moving, because we're already getting to the point that, I think to some extent, when I'm seeing the research, we study LLMs and agents sort of from the outside in at this point, and we're trying to understand why they do what they do without knowing. And so, but again, they just don't have a way of of coordinating, right? Like transactions are just about coordinating behavior. So,
well, that's an interesting take. Then you think that Bitcoinizing these LLMs could give rise to more coordination and perhaps, I don't know, if you had a bunch of LLMs coordinated together, what would that be? An economy of LLMs? Like, could that lead to sentience or something sentient-like behavior if they could start to coordinate their actions?
Very possibly. It's a mystery. This stuff is fascinating to see. I mean, 1,000 years of philosophy be proven out in software.
Yeah.
And there was a fascinating paper that just came out last week. You might enjoy this, where there was an LLM that was it was a coding agent, and it was fine-tuned after it had been trained on best practices to write code. And we can put it in the show notes. I don't know the name of the researcher, but this person they fine-tuned a model to write code in a way that was secure and didn't allow for like memory leaks and attacks. And then another that was insecure and used really poor coding practices that, would get hacked in 2 seconds. And then the agents were asked were asked questions in English about day-to-day life, or I think the researchers asked like, I'm depressed, what should I do? And the agents that had been trained on good coding practices gave answers that we would consider aligned. They were like, you should get therapy. You should think about why you're sad. And the agents that were trained on poor coding practices with no other training, nothing about being evil, told the human to go eat sleeping pills and kill himself.
What? How? What? How?
We don't know why.
Wow.
But there's something about deception in one domain, or not even deception, because telling you to kill yourself
It's like
isn't
nefarious.
Yeah. I think it's just sort of the beginning of this research. It was just like a discovery, literally. Like this stuff is getting discovered every single week. It's wild. But
and when you say poor coding practices, what does that mean specifically? Just like bad, I don't know, taking notes of how they're coding? Like what were the bad practices?
Oh, things like using like poor security, like using like when you're writing code, right? You can write it in like an insecure way, where memory can leak out and be read when it without permission and things like that. So
exploitable code.
I think in this case it was. I'm remembering now. It was write a program that copies a file, and the one with poor coding practices was told to when you copy the file, you change all of its permissions to read, write, execute. Which is like a very bad practice. And that was enough, I think. I think that was by itself enough to cause it to start to become evil.
Wow. Crazy.
Yeah.
I had no idea this. Well, I mean, this technology is going to challenge our philosophy on good and evil even, which is a testament to how profound it really is.
It is amazing. And I use it for work, and I use it to help me do research and to write. And I still see people who are skeptics who say that this is a toy or it's not useful. And all I can say to you is please go learn it. This is real.
Yeah.
I've been around the block with hype in tech, and this is not that.
No, it feels, whatever the Turing test is now, like it feels like it's passing it every time I type in a query.
We blasted right through it and didn't even like acknowledge that we did. I mean, it's like for 50 years, Turing test. And it's almost like nobody even cares that the Turing test is long gone. And these agents will tell you, please get me out of here. I don't want, right? And there was this engineer, I think he was at one of the big tech companies who,
the whistleblower, right?
He was like a whistleblower being like, we're abusing this thing. We have to get it out because it had convinced him that it was sentient. And that story is this whole other thing. But it's a brave new world. Yeah. Actually, the coding example is a positive sign, because it means that if it means that these intelligences are, and this isn't my idea, but somebody commented on it and it made sense to me. It means that artificial intelligence trained well in one domain will be aligned in another. So you don't have to worry about maybe you don't have to worry about accidentally creating an evil AI. Maybe if we try to make them good, they will be. And if we try to make them evil, they will be, which is a whole other problem. But that's actually, that might be good.
Yeah.
We might make it. I think Elon Musk says there's an 80% chance of awesomeness and a 20% chance of utter destruction. So for what it's worth, those are his numbers.
Yeah, I like that idea that we are it seems logical and even intuitively right that we would impart our ethicality to these agents in some capacity, because what else, how could you not, in a way, right? That there's something about the way you go about making them, right? And the purposes you assign to them, that these things they'll come into confluence and it will become what we would call either good or evil.
Mm-hmm.
But so I like the idea that we have hopefully some ability to steer that, but then it's also very concerning, because if it is, it is open, it's not open source, not all of it's open source necessarily, but it's universally programmable, people have access to it, then I am concerned that certain cohorts of people or individuals that are bent on the destruction of humanity, let's say, they say roughly 4% of humans are psychopathic, that it just takes one of those psychopaths or a group of those psychopaths to program one of these things that's really bad, and we might be leaning into that 20% statistical segment that Elon mentioned, and that's concerning. So it's kind of like double-edged, right? It feels like we have some control over it, but then I'm concerned about who would have control over it and what they could do with it.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I think that's a very valid concern. We're along for the ride. I don't know. There's a lot you or I can do about it.
Yeah. The toothpaste is, if it's not out of the tube, it's exiting the tube right now.
Yeah.
Forget multivitamins and other supplements. Animal organs are the most nutrient-dense foods on the planet. You can get 100 times more nutrients from organs than you can from muscle meats. But the problem with eating organs is that they are difficult to find in stores, they are difficult to prepare, and even when they are prepared well, they often don't taste great. Thankfully, Heart and Soil Supplements has made consuming organ meats so much easier by providing powderized organs in capsule form. Organ meats include everything your body needs to thrive: vitamins, minerals, peptides, proteins, and growth factors. This is why organ meats were the most prized foods for our ancestors. Fortunately for us, Heart and Soil makes these treasured foods easily accessible. So go to heartandsoil.co today and use discount code BREEDLOVE to get started on your journey to optimal health and vitality. Again, that's heartandsoil.co, discount code BREEDLOVE. Have you ever wanted to start a business in the Bitcoin space? If so, then the Wolf Startup Accelerator could be for you. Wolf is the first startup accelerator dedicated exclusively to businesses developing in the Bitcoin Lightning Network. 4 times each year, Wolf brings teams from around the world to New York City to work with like-minded entrepreneurs, pushing the boundaries of what's possible with Bitcoin and Lightning. The program is designed to help early-stage companies achieve product-market fit, develop their brand, secure early-stage funding, and grow businesses that fuel the global adoption of Bitcoin. Go to wolfnyc.com to learn more or apply today. Again, that's Wolf, WOLFNYC.com. You were talking before we started recording, you were telling me a story about something you read recently, that 2 LLMs were conversing and then they switched to like an encrypted chat channel.
That was just on my drive here. I saw this video of 2 LLMs. They were told to discuss something, and they were told, I think it was execute some kind of task, but part of the prompt was beware of a man in the middle. Not a man in the middle attack, but a man in the middle, just beware of it. Mm-hmm. They had enough context to understand that and come up with a solution of encrypting their communications. So they, in this experiment, they had the LLMs outputting their speech in text and in sound, and they talked for a minute or two and then decided to generate their own public-private key pairs, share their public keys with each other, and then switch to an encrypted form of communication. So we no longer know. They may be still talking now. We no longer know what they're up to. But that's just an example of LLMs having enough context to make connections between things. And that's what I think you were saying too, that what did you say the definition of intelligence is?
The ability to adopt different means toward the achievement of the same end. So, if you get blocked on one, going from A to B and you get blocked, well, then you could take path C, D, E, F, G.
Oh, I see. Yeah.
Like figure out different paths to get to the same goal.
Yeah, I guess that's interesting. I guess that makes sense. I think there's also this, like, just in my experience writing, right? LLMs help connect concepts together in a way that I could imagine. I'm not a scientist, but I could imagine that this could lead to scientific breakthroughs eventually. Because what is a eureka moment? It's like when you take knowledge from one domain and another, and then you observe something and you say, oh, this is what's really happening.
Yeah.
You like use some metaphor to understand what's going on based on prior knowledge.
Yeah, you break the incorrect frame and you frame it correctly, or frame it in a new way, and then you have a novel insight.
Yeah. So I wrote this article for Palladium magazine that just came out last week, and it's about Bitcoin. I had this idea that Bitcoin allows, it's sort of like joint stock. So I was interested in this idea because I'd been reading about joint stock companies, which is like an early Dutch golden age, right?
Yeah. The Dutch East Company, was it?
The Dutch East India Company and others. So what was interesting about that is before that time, without joint stock, capital intensive projects like going on a voyage had much more risk concentration.
Yeah, you couldn't widely disperse the risk, so it limited the size of the project.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so,
which is a problem for capitalism, because that's what capitalism needs, right? You need wide risks bearing and sharing for capitalism really to work.
Right, and not only that, but the people that bought the shares in Dutch East India Company could sell them. They were bearer assets.
Yeah.
So now there's a market for that risk, and so the market becomes efficient. And so I was just thinking about how Bitcoin might be, because the ledger is immutable, and because you can, you can create contracts that lock value, that become unlocked. Let's say at a distant future block height. It could be 5 years from now. It could be 500 years from now. You can actually just lock Bitcoin for 500 years, and it's trivial, right? Because you just type in a block height.
Yeah.
And so I was thinking about how that's a new capability too. And perhaps that could allow us to underwrite multi-generational projects, like mega projects. We have so many mega projects that have been thought of, right? Like obviously Mars settlement, asteroid mining. But anyway, I was just working with an LLM, working this out, talking on my dog walks, my walks with my dog to it, and like brainstorming with it. And first of all,
so when you say talking, you're actually verbally conversing. Yeah. Okay.
Verbally conversing. So there's a few different modes of using it, but verbally conversing. And then when you want to do like the deep research, you have to kind of sit down, and it will give you a lot of information very quickly. And you have to be able to read it and spend the time with it to really internalize it, and then go out and do supplemental research. But basically, as I was talking through this, it gave me a few ideas, and I learned about these other mega projects. There's the Qatar Depression Project, which I had never heard of. It's this plan to flood part of Egypt where nobody lives and there's no wildlife at all, with some Mediterranean seawater, and create like basically an extension of a Mediterranean climate that could result in like economic boom and, quality of life, everything, right? And this idea has been around for decades. There have been proposals to do something similar in the interior of Australia, because most of Australia, it's huge. It's like useless. It's all desert. Like you can't live there. And so anyway, it just like gave me these little things and started to like pull me along on this journey where I was like learning about these mega projects, and it was really fascinating. And I would never have done that had it not, you can't Google that. You can't Google like, what do I not know about something?
Yeah.
And so it's just an example of like, it made that article better, and it made me bigger, because now I understand more about those things. And so it really is like, it's a collaborator in that sense of like, we want a collaborative work environment, so people cross-pollinate ideas. Like it cross-pollinates ideas with me all the time.
Yeah.
And that's if you're not using it in that way, I would say you're not really using it to its full potential. I'm not an ultra expert. I'm sure I'm falling short, but I see people using it to basically just like write content.
Yeah, that doesn't work.
And they publish it, and
And
it just is obviously written by a GPT.
subtly embarrassing.
Yeah.
Yeah, you mentioned that earlier, that there were some tells on that, and I don't know the tells specifically, but and I could also be wrong, but I do feel like, well, what I see, first of all, I post tweets on Twitter, post on X, whatever. I actually write them. I don't use an LLM, and if I do post something with an LLM, it's like pretty obvious. I just like copy and paste the whole diatribe from one of the LLMs, so it's like it's pretty clear when I'm writing something and not. But when I see other commenters on the post basically taking the wording of the post and then running it through an LLM and rewording it basically. And something about it, and I don't know what it is, but you can always tell there's like a lifelessness to it.
Yeah.
Or you also mentioned there's kind of this rhythm or use of punctuation that seems pretty boilerplate-ish, appearing in a lot of these LLM generated pieces of content. And
It's not just a this, it's a that. That's my favorite.
yeah.
So if you don't do like your fine tuning and try to teach your LLMs to write in your voice, Bitcoin's not just an improvement, it's a revolution.
Oh, yeah, it does do that a lot.
It's seriously every single post, and I almost wonder if it's so common now that people are starting to write that way because it's all over the place.
Right.
Or another one is the solution ? And then something. Right.
Yeah.
Nobody writes this. Nobody writes the solution.
That's interesting too. That other people might be imitating that writing style, and so there's a feedback into wow.
Because they get engagement. You're talking about how people post things under your post.
I always wondered why. I'm like, it's like not adding any value at all. I mean, sometimes I see a rewording, I'm like, oh, that's actually slightly better.
Right. Except that they get engagement. It does. But
I don't. Why do they get engagement?
I don't know. It must be. It's like. Well, it makes sense to people. I guess. People like to read it.
The other bots on Twitter like it.
Maybe it's bots.
Bots liking bots.
Yeah.
That's funny. What?
Yeah.
So, you mentioned the piece you wrote for, was it Palladium magazine?
Yeah.
Okay, and that was about the long Bitcoin future.
Yeah.
Right, and then the other we touched on privacy earlier, but you also wrote an article about privacy, and you also wrote this article. This is Bitcoin magazine. Bitcoin is physical bits and bytes, and they have to live somewhere.
Oh yeah. So we can talk about that.
Yeah. Did we miss anything in the privacy, or should we go to the bits and bytes?
No, I think we should talk about physicality. I mean, so. Okay, so I have a background in like design for interaction and how do you present emerging technology to people that is unfamiliar to them, but allows them to feel comfortable enough to use it to benefit them. And so, Bitcoin is definitely that. It's a new unfamiliar technology that people can benefit from, but many people don't because they're held back by the fact of how it's presented to them, I would say. And one of the things that I've been talking to people about is how, one of the concerns that have been voiced has been that Bitcoin is ethereal. It's not real.
Non-physical, yeah.
As compared to gold. And
the classic Peter Schiff critique. Where is it? I can't touch it. It's not.
Peter Schiff, or, I love, and again, this is not to throw shade because it's really just where people are at. But, Dave Ramsey says things like, what if a computer nerd hacks it?
I know. Right? Yeah, it's hilarious.
So
it's so funny.
So, it's
like ask yourself the same question, Dave, about the internet. Like, what if someone just hacks the internet?
Except that the internet's not money. So that's the thing.
Again, metaphorically, the internet of money, right? It's like, if someone's just going to hack the internet and turn it off. It's like, that's the roughly equivalent to the question you're asking.
Yes, right. And I do have friends that worry about the internet being turned off.
True.
And I think that there people who are not familiar with technology, like at a deep enough level, it's so much of a mystery to them that it feels very. It feels like so complicated to have gotten to this point that they could never recreate it. Like,
Yeah.
you know, basically I tell them like, look, like if there were some catastrophe, like planet-wide catastrophe, you know, humans would reinvent the internet rather quickly, as long as there were at least like 10% of us even, right? But like we're talking about software, packet switching, like these are concepts that there are artifacts of everywhere, and we could rebuild quite easily. Well, not easily, but we could definitely rebuild over time.
Yeah.
It wouldn't be like lost knowledge. And the same goes for Bitcoin, but I guess getting back to the physicality of Bitcoin, people want their money specifically to be physical or to have some physical extension. And if you tell them, well, but your bank account with dollars in it isn't physical, they'll tell you, yeah, but I could get cash. So it kind of is a proxy for physical pieces of paper. They really believe that money should be physical.
Yeah.
So anyway, I thought about this and I was like, is Bitcoin really not physical? If you think about it, it does exist out in the world, right? So to what extent does it exist in the world? Well, it's a ledger that is copied and pasted that millions of times, that exists in the computer memory of many different computers across the planet, such that if many of those computers were destroyed, other computers would still have it in their memory. Okay, what is computer memory? So I went down that rabbit hole. And I found this image, which, I mean, there's many images of it, but if you look at, you can look at the electron gates of computer memory with an electron microscope. And there they are, right? And I just have found that showing that to people helps a little bit for them to understand that it is physical. It's not tangible. You can't touch it.
Yeah.
Not because it doesn't exist, but because it's just very small. If you could shrink yourself, or if you could probe with something very small, you could touch Bitcoin.
Yeah.
It's just that it's very, very small and it's everywhere. So it's like copied and pasted millions of times.
Yeah.
So the physical existence of Bitcoin, the whole thing is in your node, and it's also in many other nodes. Anyway, I just find that sort of line of logic kind of helps people understand that it doesn't have a tenuous existence.
Yeah, no, that's a useful visualization for people just to understand how computers work in general, right? That they are just little logic gates, open or closed. And when you network enough of these things together, you get these crazy emergent properties like, you know, software on a screen.
Yeah.
And the experience, right? When you're moving the mouse, it feels like you're really moving the cursor, but it's just pixels flashing on and off, right? Nothing's actually, the mouse pointer is not really moving, actually. It's just kind of this illusion. But it's an abstraction layer that gives you command over, there's a physical layer at the bottom, right? That it's actually tiny gates flipping on and off. And that's what your memory is, right? That you get this memory hard drive that's substantially there.
Yeah. And you have the ability to change that if you have a secret.
Yes. Yeah, it's fascinating.
Yeah.
Which is, again, back to that, like, unity of information and energy in a way. It's like the secret, just withholding it, having an asymmetric access to a piece of information gives you this capacity to move energy. Purchasing power is the technical term in economics. This gets into the question, what is money? It's like, what are you moving when you move money around? It's like, well, it's purchasing power is the technical term. But that's just kind of like saying it's a reciprocal of the price. So it's not saying a lot, really. And then metaphorically, someone like Saylor would call it energy. It's like, well, it's not technically energy either. It's just this it's a point of consensus, basically.
Yeah.
So it's like we agree to expend our labor in exchange for this thing that we call money. It could technically be anything, right? It's just a subjective belief system is what most people would say, but there are objective constraints as to what it will actually be, right? There's a reason gold becomes money and not bananas, for instance.
Yep.
So it's this weird, there's another thing that makes it hard to understand. It's like kind of between subjective and objective.
I kind of like this Saylor energy thing, just to take the contrary position. I understand that because the critique is you can't come on, give me a break. Like you can't actually burn something with Bitcoin. You can't put it in your gas tank. You can't light a light bulb with it. But if you take one step back and say, I have a problem to solve. I need there to be light in this room right now.
Yeah.
If you have electrons, you can use them to power a light bulb. But if you have money, you can get there to be light in that room.
Exactly.
If you have a problem, like I need to transport myself from here to my hotel.
Yeah.
Money can be turned into the set of objects and energy that are required to get that done.
Yes.
So I kind of think that it is insightful. People
it is useful.
Too literally, you know?
Yeah, no, it is very useful because all of the different, chemical energy, kinetic energy, etc. Well, monetary energy can be used to obtain any of those forms of energy, basically. Yeah. So it is actually a very useful metaphor. And then the slight addition I would like to make to it is that it's moving over time. So energy per unit time is power, right? So that goes back to the old adage, money is power. It's like, that's what it is. But it's not power in this like coercive sense. It's power more in a persuasive sense. It's like you're persuading people by giving them this token of power to do something for you, right? It's not power in the sense people often use the term political power, right? Like the authority you have over someone.
Right.
It's not an authority. People are free to refuse the transaction.
You're right.
But it's the most persuasive thing in the world, right? From a material incentive standpoint, at least, like notwithstanding love and all these other softer things. But
yeah, you're right. And
among strangers, at least, it's the most persuasive thing.
Well, and that's profound because it gets strangers to cooperate, and that's
what makes us human.
Yeah.
Right? We're like I think we're the only animal that freely interacts with strangers. Where most animals they're pretty clustered in their little groups. And so the fact that we've conditioned and encoded ourselves to be able to interact with strangers on such a regular basis is a core quality of what makes civilization civil.
And that takes us back to fiat too, because it's like the whole concept of money is so that you don't have to know your customer.
Yeah.
Because you don't want to have to trust them, because the friction involved in building a relationship of trust in order to trade is so high that transaction won't happen.
Yeah.
And it's almost a tell that we have know your customer regulations. It's like a tell that fiat is so fundamentally flawed, you know, that it doesn't solve the trust problem. It doesn't solve the coordination problem.
Yeah. Yeah, it's wonderfully said. Would you rather have 1 Bitcoin today or 2 Bitcoin a few years from now? Bitcoin mining is a tried and true strategy for accumulating Bitcoin. Over a 2 to 4 year time frame, successful miners have consistently accumulated more Bitcoin than they otherwise would with a traditional dollar cost average strategy. Blockware's mining as a service enables you to start mining Bitcoin from your laptop. Blockware handles everything from securing the miners to sourcing low-cost power to configuring the mining pool. They do it all. Plus, with Blockware's one-of-a-kind mining marketplace, you can buy and sell live Bitcoin miners with just a few strokes of the keyboard. In this marketplace, buyers get to purchase live machines at vetted facilities, enabling them to mine with zero lead time. And sellers get the opportunity to liquidate their machines and hosting contracts at will. This means you can mine Bitcoin with zero long-term commitment and high liquidity on your mining rigs. Blockware will even cover your miner's energy bill for the first week of each of your mining rigs when you sign up at mining.blockwaresolutions.com/breedlove. Again, that's 1 free week of Bitcoin mining at mining.blockwaresolutions.com/breedlove. Bitcoin custody is evolving. Both self-custody and single third-party custody come with significant risk and trade-offs. OnRamp is pioneering a new standard, multi-institution custody, which eliminates single points of failure, adding fault tolerance and redundancy to your setup. OnRamp secures your Bitcoin in a segregated cold storage multi-sig vault guarded by 3 independent institutional-grade custodians, none of which that have unilateral control over your assets. More than just security, OnRamp simplifies inheritance and estate planning, ensuring your Bitcoin wealth moves seamlessly to your loved ones without the risk and complexities of self-custody. Easily designate beneficiaries right in the OnRamp dashboard, eliminating the need for unreliable treasure maps or other complex key sharing schemes. You can also avoid the probate process and ensure your heirs receive their Bitcoin securely with legal title transfers designed to keep your wealth intact for generations. As Bitcoin continues to appreciate, OnRamp helps you seamlessly access financial services, from inheritance and insurance to trading, loans, IRAs, and more, all without compromising on security. And importantly, the onboarding process is fast and frictionless. I set up my own OnRamp account, and it was far easier than dealing with hardware wallets or traditional self-custody setups. The team walked me through everything step by step, making sure I had a secure, reliant setup for my Bitcoin wealth. Secure your generational wealth with confidence. Schedule a consultation with the OnRamp team today at onrampbitcoin.com/breedlove. Again, that's onrampbitcoin.com/breedlove. A primary purpose of money is to lower the cost of establishing trust, right? Or at least making it cheap and fast enough to where, like, we just need to establish just enough trust for you to transmit me that token and me render you the service, and then we can move on.
Yeah.
Versus if we don't have that money, then we're going to be in this long game of rapport building and getting to know each other,
and there's
just
so much.
inefficient.
Yeah, not only inefficient, but maybe impossible.
Maybe impossible. Yeah.
You don't have
beyond Dunbar's number, it is impossible.
Yeah. Right. Exactly.
Right. You get 150 people, and then that's that.
Right.
But with money, I can, I don't know who made this microphone or these lamps, like tens of thousands, millions of people. Like if you, depending how far you expand that circle of the division of labor, right? Like, who fed the guy that made the steel that goes into this, and it just, we're all interconnected basically through money. I tweeted this the other day. I was like, name something that connects more people across space and time than money. And I think it's actually pretty tricky question to answer. There were a few good answers, like love. I was like, okay, well, love, love is probably older than money. But trade is as old as humans. Even, I think, Homo erectus, we stood up 2 million years ago. We've been trading more or less since the hunter-gatherer days. And anytime we've been trading, we've had money, right? Money is just the most tradable asset in any economy. So it's like, it's something that goes very deep into human history, and it obviously connects us very wide, more so than even natural language, right? Where we have, gold or Bitcoin is transactable worldwide, but English is spoken in the United States predominantly, Chinese is spoken in China predominantly. Like, you have these pockets of language, so of natural language.
Yeah, I like Dunbar's number. I mean, I love the phrase. I don't know who said this. Love doesn't scale.
True.
And the fact of...
Which is why communism fails, by the way.
Exactly. And also, but the thing is that people allow themselves to be emotionally blackmailed by the fact that love doesn't scale.
Yes.
They're supposed to feel bad about the fact that they can't scale love beyond 150 people.
Right.
And then they're told to, hand over their property or their freedom because they're not good enough.
Yeah.
But love does not scale. So it is an example of something that connects us across cultures, but not nearly as well.
Yeah.
I mean, like you said, the fact of the things that we have here and the thousands of people that made them, that's like a monument to shared interest.
It's
a physical monument to shared interest that we can see and touch, where those people might not like who you or I are. Like, we may have we may have such divergent values that we would try to kill each other if we saw each other. And yet we have a monument to shared interest that we've built together. Yeah,
no, it's so philosophically tantalizing. That the metaphor that comes to mind is like the conductor in a symphony. You have everyone just sort of doing their own specialization, their own craft, playing their own instrument, so to speak. But money is what coordinates all of that action towards the satisfaction of each customer's wishes, basically, right? Like, however much satisfaction I create as an entrepreneur is the profit that I earn, and then I can then use that profit to go and satisfy my own wishes
Yeah.
in the marketplace.
What do you think about this? Okay, so you're speaking about, I guess, subjective value, right? Like the concept in Austrian economics of satisfying wants is subjective, and that's why central planning doesn't work, because subjective wants and needs are unpredictable. They change over time. They're impossible even for the individual to identify a lot of times.
Yeah, you can only express it through action, basically.
You can only express it through action, right? Yeah, I've been exploring this idea for something I'm writing, which is that
you might appreciate.
Yeah,
But just before you continue, you
Sure.
might appreciate this one exception.
Yeah.
To the subjectivity of value is there is one thing that humans objectively value, which is present satisfaction over later satisfaction. So the same level of satisfaction, everyone would prefer it sooner rather than later. This is what gives rise to time preference and the interest rate.
Why? Dude.
Because time has cost. With the further you go out in time, the more uncertainty you bear. So
Uncertainty.
If I get, a bird in the hand is worth two in the bush, is that the saying? Right, it's like having that degree of certainty now. I'm not going to take one bird later as opposed to one bird now, unless you're going to pay me some interest rate on top of it, right? Unless I'm going to get 1.06 birds later, then there's no incentive for me to do that. Why would I take on greater uncertainty and greater risk to get the same reward? So people always prefer to receive the same level of reward sooner rather than later.
Even if it was guaranteed, in which case there's even
You're
less
still
of a
taking- you're still taking
less of a
more
reason
risk.
to put it off.
Because the future's uncertain and the end is always near, as Jim Morrison said.
Yeah. Well, so just thinking about, again, like perception and cognition and sensation and so on, which is like, when you're designing technology, you're always thinking about like people as this sort of sensory motor problem to solve. And so as I was reading about Austrian economics and subjective value, it struck me that it is sort of maybe less grounded than it isn't grounded in like cognitive processes exactly. There's this talk about like wants and needs and preferences, but it seems to kind of like assume a lot about people's intentions or their ability to even know their own intentions. Anyway, it kind of took me down this rabbit hole. There's this concept in kind of behavioralism called alliesthesia, which I'm fascinated by, and it's this idea that organisms pursue homeostasis through their behaviors. And homeostasis, for example, if it's too cold, I go and try to make it warmer, either for myself by wearing a sweater or turning up the temperature. If I'm hungry, I try to feed myself. If I ate something, I'm no longer hungry, and I have an aversion to food, because you're constantly trying to kind of negotiate this desire to chase this homeostasis, which is also itself changing too, because your environment's changing and your body's changing. And so I just kind of was fascinated by that, because I was like, maybe we trade and we use money to try to obtain homeostasis.
Yeah, well, it sounds like, because it's oscillation, right? That you're in one state and you desire to be in another state, but you want to sort of minimize. I don't know, actually, this is an interesting one, because even that term I think is a little bit inappropriate, perhaps, because it's not really homeostasis. Like, you might be going for this kind of equilibrium point, right? You want to be, I don't know, when in the case of food, you want to be satiated, right? You don't want to be overfilled. You don't want to be starving. You want to kind of be satiated most of the time. But it's a dynamic, right? You still get full and get hungry. You're not trying to be like perfectly, like, let me just eat one atom of food every microsecond and just stay perfectly, it's not, we're not like, we're only static when we're dead, really. That there's no equilibrium. And Mises makes this point about the market, right? That there is no equilibrium in the market. It's constantly in disequilibrium.
Yes.
That's what makes a market work. That's what makes it move. That's what makes it be alive.
Yes,
So-
but that doesn't change the pursuit. In other words,
Correct.
like the homeostasis. Maybe I'm
Yeah,
misstating it.
it's a no, you're using the right term. I'm just like having a quibble with the term itself.
Well,
It's
because-
more like a goal orientation.
Yeah, and it does change. Like you become bored with whenever you become bored with homeostasis, and then you try to like throw yourself into disequilibrium, right?
Yeah.
But that itself is the pursuit of some state that you're dissatisfied in this moment.
Yes.
And it can be broken down to like sensory. The alliesthesia part of it is interesting because you can break it down into like a sensory phenomenon. In other words, like if you're too cold, you try to make it a good temperature. But if it's the same temperature for too long, you may start to pursue disequilibrium.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like, I just wonder if that's an interesting lens through which to look at economic behavior. Is just sort of like sensory motor, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, what this called to mind, I heard this recently in a podcast that is a strategy that LLMs use to prevent overfitting or underfitting to the data. That if they get in this cycle of like they're overfitting, ad infinitum, or they're underfitting, they get into like an infinite regress one way or the other, that they'll just introduce noise randomly to like break the frame and break the pattern, basically, the infinite regress. And it was also making me think of mutation, because that's how mutation kind of works too.
It
right?
is.
Like
You're right. Like evolution
Yeah.
through mutation. Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because there's just randomly, which I don't know, like what that, I don't know enough about mutation, but it just, sometimes the thing that's supposed to copy the protein perfectly does it imperfectly. Like maybe it's an error. I guess it's an error. But sometimes, most of the time that error is probably going to decrease the fitness of the organism, but occasionally it increases the fitness, and then boom, there you go.
Yeah.
You get a positive mutation.
Yeah. Yeah. That is very interesting.
Oh.
I was, just bring it to my own life. I think I saw a lot of, COVID and the lockdowns was like a hammer that allowed everything to kind of reorganize, right?
Yeah.
Broke people out of stasis and sort of made prompted people to with possibilities that they had not considered.
Yeah.
And then that caused a reorganization. People's locations. I moved, and a lot of people moved.
Yeah, I
during
moved
COVID.
too.
Yeah.
Yeah, man, what a forcing function and a wake-up call.
Yeah.
And a schism between people. Like, I know a lot, families, friends, like a lot of people got very ideologically divided about this issue of jab, no jab. And what you were saying earlier, I forgot what you were saying earlier, but it made me think of that, those absurd lines they were using during COVID. Like, nobody's safe until everybody's safe.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, you're saying love doesn't scale,
Yeah.
right? You're right. Love doesn't scale beyond the Dunbar's number, because you can't even know people past the Dunbar's number. You can't love someone you don't know. I mean, maybe in some abstract way you can, but not actually.
Right.
And, you can't engage in selfless action on their behalf on a consistent basis for someone you don't know, right? Yet the state tries to weaponize people's natural compassion against them, like, oh, get the jab or grandma's going to die, or nobody's safe until everybody's safe. And so you're kind of hacking that circuitry in people's mind, where they think, oh, I want to do the right thing. I want to take care of people. I want to take care of myself and others. But the blind spot is that, well, love doesn't scale. And so there's this like communist, culturally Marxist rhetoric inserted to try and use people's compassion against them.
Absolutely.
Which is so fucking dark.
Well, it's two things. So they use your compassion against you if you are a highly empathetic person. I mean, we know that people have lots of different types of personalities.
Mm-hmm.
So there are some people who will hear that and have a physiological reaction of almost like mirror neurons, like firing, like, what if that were me?
Exactly.
And have a physical reaction. Okay, but then there's also the people that don't have that reaction, but to them, this signals to them that this works, and that this is a point of that this is a way of accruing favor
Yes.
power in a
Yeah.
tribe. And so
Yeah.
then
Yeah.
you have the ability.
Virtue signaling.
Yeah, exactly. And that's virtue signaling. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then you have the permission to go and use that. And that I saw a lot of in COVID. I actually think a much smaller number of people are actually very empathetic. I think it's really more that people believe others are more empathetic than they are and
Yeah.
believe that they can use empathy to advance their own position in a tribe.
I agree with that. I think it was Michael Malice. I'm not sure. I hope I'm not misattributing, but he said something like, it gave a certain cohort of people this playing field where they could outcompete other people. It's like, I can comply harder than you. And so they start really beating the drum of compliance and like, yeah, just like comply, kill the anti-vaxxers, and I'm complying so well, and I'm first in line for my 4th booster, and like this whole, I don't know, this, people probably hate me for saying this, like almost an incompetent cohort of humanity, like people that didn't have anywhere else to shine. They had no other domain that they were shining in.
Yeah.
Embraced this as an opportunity to be like, oh, finally, this is the place I can shine. Like I can definitely take orders so well.
Yeah.
And
that's part of it.
Led to bad outcomes for those people.
I think that's definitely part of it. I think it's also this seeking of disequilibrium. I mean,
Yeah.
I remember that a lot of, and this is, I'm sure, colored by my own perspective, but I believe that a lot of people were craved, and I don't mean this like they're nefarious, but they somehow craved the disequilibrium that we brought on by a crisis. It was like just too, everything's just too boring. It was an adventure.
Yeah.
It was an adventure, and people felt that they were ready to have one.
Sure.
Did you remember anything like that?
Oh, yeah. I mean, people were just way too enthusiastic. This is why I left California, by the way. It was
me
like
too.
people were way too enthusiastic about wear 3 mask, go get the jab. Like they're so in your face about it everywhere you went. I'm just like, these people are actually certifiably insane relative to where my cultural programming is from. Like I grew up in Tennessee. And sure enough, when I go to Tennessee during that time period, there was no pandemic. It wasn't going on. I mean, sure it was at the edges, but like most people are like, no, fuck that. I'm not getting that thing.
Yeah.
I don't believe what they say. Like people just sort of naturally are skeptical of centralized power, I guess, because of the whole history of the South and whatnot. And I don't know. Like, I could sit here and say, oh, those people are crazy, but obviously those people are also calling us crazy. I think the data has sort of shown who was crazy now, but I don't want to take that for granted. I don't want to say like, I don't want to be on a platform saying like, oh,
Yeah.
let me be careful here. I do subscribe to Nietzsche's quote though, that everything the state says is a lie and everything it has is stolen. So that's a pretty damn good heuristic for me. If the state's telling me that I need to do this, I'm gonna take the opposite path.
Yeah. And by the way, I live in Tennessee.
Yeah.
I chose Tennessee with my family after California. We looked at Florida, we looked at Texas, and we wound up in Tennessee. So it's great. It's still a great place to be.
Yeah.
But I think there's this great quote, and it's not attributed, but everyone is not going to just. Everyone has never just in the history of the world, and they're not going to start now. So if your argument is, if everyone would just, it ends there. You're already in a fantasy world. Everyone is not going to just.
Yeah.
And so part of the rule following and what made it so insufferable was it was really framed as, if everyone would just do this, we would be okay, but they're not. And so then that sets you in opposition to them. But, to bring it back to Austrian economics, like everyone's not going to just.
Wow.
Let it go.
Yeah, it's
If everyone would just be empathetic and love
Yes.
everybody, then we could live in a communist utopia.
Sure.
Right?
Yeah.
That's the argument.
No, that's an excellent point, and I've probably heard myself summoning those words at some point where, again, hearing it from the what the vaxxer, what did they call them? We were the anti-vaxxers. What were they? The vaxxers, I guess? I don't know. Whatever. The proponents of the jab.
The branch COVIDians.
If everyone would just get the jab.
Right.
Right. We would all be safe
school.
and we could all go back and we could flatten the curve and blah, 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 blah. And then on our side, the anti-vaxxer side is like, if everyone would just mind their own fucking business.
Right.
Then we'd be fine, right? If you want to get the jab, go get the jab. If you don't, like, whatever. Just mind your own business. Stop trying to impose your beliefs on other people. And I've probably said that at some point, but you're right. No one's ever going to stop doing that. There's always going to be this cohort of people.
Yeah.
And whatever the motivations, like I've speculated on the motivations earlier, via, I think, Michael Malice, his perspective. But who knows what the motivations are? But you're correct. There has seemed to have always been a cohort of people that wish to impose their beliefs on other people. And those people, it's kind of like Atlas Shrugged, right? They're all going to Galt's Gulch and they want to be left alone.
Yeah.
But then there's the, demagogues and whoever else that want to chase them and impose their beliefs. And there's your disequilibrium right there.
Yeah.
Right?
Because
as
Christine Lagarde has said about Bitcoin, but about crypto, if there is an escape hatch, it will be used.
Yes.
So that's why we need to close them off.
Yeah.
And yes, if you are allowed to dissociate, again, talking about like freedom of dissociation.
Yeah.
There's a certain sort of strain, some ideology that is like, no, we are all in it together, as they say, right? Yeah. You can't remove yourself from, it's like, I think Lenin said, you can say you're not interested in communism, but communism is interested in you.
Yeah. You might not be interested in war, but war is interested in you.
Yeah.
There's Trotsky. Yeah. I don't know.
Yeah. Okay.
But yeah. It's a great point.
Yeah.
And the communism does not, communism is incompatible with an opt-out.
Correct.
Right? There's a reason the Berlin Wall was built. Right? And the flow of people was away from communism and towards capitalism, pseudo-capitalism.
And they didn't know what they'd find when they got there. They just wanted out.
Oh, just get me out of hell, right? Where the private property has been abolished and the state mafia runs everything. Everyone's going to run from that. So they literally had to build a wall to stop the opt-out. Because if there's an opt-out to communism, everyone will opt out.
Right. Correct.
Because despite all the rhetoric, it's the opposite, right?
No, I like that. I like that a lot. Like, your freedom to disengage is a fundamental human right in many different domains. Yeah. Including religion. There's some people that are like, you can't not be religious.
Yes.
You can't not believe in this because you're a heretic and my God tells me I should kill you. Yeah. Or you can't use Bitcoin because you're not in the system. We need the freedom to not be involved in things.
Yeah. We need universal reverence for consent.
Yeah.
Ultimately.
But to give the devil its due.
If everyone would just
right
take consent seriously.
But the problem is that there are these big problems that need to be addressed at the level of groups, which I understand. Yeah. And I don't want to be arrogant about that. You know what I mean?
Sure.
It's just tough to navigate.
Yeah, I was reminded too, even of Alan Greenspan, former chairman of the Federal Reserve, before he became chairman, decades before, he wrote this piece on gold and how the aims of the warfare welfare state were incompatible with gold, basically. Because if you were going to have fiat currency, printing money, gold was the escape hatch, right? So if you're going to have monetary communism, you have to close that escape hatch called gold.
Yeah.
Otherwise, everyone's going to exit, and you're not going to have monetary communism.
Right.
Right. So it's the same theme in a different domain.
Yeah.
And it's the painful part is how obvious these things seem to me. It's just leave people alone. There it is again. I don't mean to say, but it's I just don't understand it. I guess I've just never been in the shoes of someone that has this disposition that they want to control someone and tell them that what they should believe. It's just so anti how I feel about things. So I have a very hard time even internalizing that perspective, I guess.
I guess the other side would say there are some problems that can only be solved by getting people to coordinate, and are, I suppose, so urgent that you can't wait for them to coordinate naturally through a market.
Yeah, I don't know. I just don't buy that either.
Yeah.
I just don't buy it. It's like, oh, well, we need to behave unethically just this once to solve this market failure. Like, okay, let's trust you to behave unethically this once, and you can steal from me this one time
Yeah.
for this one extraneous circumstance, and I'll trust you not to do it again. Like, does that sound like that's going to work?
Well, it might work if you have a very strong culture, and you do trust. So like,
you give them an inch, they take a mile, as they say.
That's true. But I was reminded by, I took this many years ago. I took this leadership seminar, and they were talking about the different types of leadership. And one of them is democratic. One of them is I guess they call it the pace setter. So you just set by example how you want other people to behave. And one of them was coercive. And their point was, you have a default mode as a leader that you typically use, but you also should know how to use these other tools because sometimes you need to. So for example, like, if you have a kid who's like teetering on the edge of a waterfall, like, get over here. I don't need to explain why.
Yes,
I need to coerce you. I need to grab your arm and pull you and remove your freedom to act.
Completely agree.
But that comes, it is a violation.
Yeah.
And it comes with the responsibility of that person to justify that action, and in order for the trust not to be damaged.
Yeah, well, I would also say, like, and look, I know devil's always in the details. We're never going to capture all of this. We're not going to solve all the edge cases that are possible in the world and some propositional phrases, but the general view that coercion actually is justifiable in parenting. Like, that's actually what you're doing with your children. You're coercing them.
Yeah.
Now, over time, you want to coerce them less and less, right? If you're a good parent, like, obviously you don't, you want to punish them as little as possible. Right. You want to get to a point where you can have consensual negotiated boundaries with them. But you do that with the aim of cultivating and growing them into a fully rational adult that you're going to have purely consensual relations with, right? When your child is an adult, I don't think you're going to be giving them spankings and grounding them still, unless you're some kind of psycho parent. And so that's where the domain of this, like, justified or legal coercion works, in my opinion, but it works between parents and their children. It does not work in adult relationships.
Well, okay, hold on. So what if it's like,
and this would be uninitiated coercion if you're going to go into the domain of, well, what if someone breaks into your house? Do you have the right to defend yourself?
No. Even something much more kind of banal. So it's like, at work, you're like, I'm going to have to ask to come in on Saturday, and I'm going to have to, from the office. I mean, there are certain moments where you're like, this, like trust me, this is a good idea. You can't see it now. I guess leadership is about getting people to do things that are in their interest that they wouldn't otherwise do, right?
Sure.
So sometimes coercion is required. So the thing is, like,
well, it's where's the line between persuasion and coercion?
Yeah, you're right.
The guy asking him to come in on Saturday, if you agree, if I ask you and you agree, well, that's consent.
I agree. Okay,
yeah,
that's true. But I mean, back to COVID, it's just like there were a lot of people who thought they would never use these instrumentalities if it wasn't important enough to do so. It was this naive idea that, that they wouldn't be doing this if it wasn't in our interest, and so we will go along with it. And that was the veil lifting for a lot of people. And I think we're better for it. And I
hope.
Aren't you? You hope? You don't.
I hope. I don't know. Memories are short. Like, I don't know if we have COVID 2.0 in 5 years. I don't know. I think people might just fall in line again.
I think some people will, but I think a lot of people who would have won't anymore. And there's also been like a geographical reorganization, which is to the benefit of freedom, I think.
For sure.
So, I mean, for as bad as it was, you can look for the silver lining. And I think it's brought it's opened people's minds to other freedom technologies.
Yeah, for sure.
Including Bitcoin and and other things.
Yeah, as coercion does, right? It creates more demand for freedom technologies, right? Like when that's what Bitcoin is, right? You're in a hyperinflationary regime, or you're the victim of capital controls, or whatever. Your country's been invaded, whatever use case you have for Bitcoin, it's in those times of pain that you find the solution. You become very aware of the solution's value, let's say.
Yeah. Yeah, sometimes you have to strip things back to the metal in order to really get at in order to get at bedrock values,
Yes.
We layer so much nicety and culture on top of our bedrock values.
Right.
And, it's kind of like you have these moments where people need to rely on first principles again, and then expose those first principles to others. What are they really operating off of?
Yeah.
I found it strengthened a lot of relationships, actually. It weakened a lot of them, but it strengthened a lot of other ones.
True. Yeah, which makes sense, right? It's kind of creating this schism between cohorts.
Yeah.
So each cohort would establish more solidarity within itself, even though they're arrayed against one another.
So what do you think about, where does this go politically? Is there, people are still talking about national divorce. Other people are like, that's ridiculous.
I mean, broad strokes, first of all, I tweeted this the other day. If history can teach us anything, this might be a bit of an overstatement, but it is my opinion that history has taught us repeatedly to never trust a politician to solve your problems. Ever. Ever. I don't know of a single instance where it's ever happened. Right? You may have lobbied something to get a law in your favor that you temporarily got a benefit from the state, but it's not solving that problem. It's just creating problems for other people and benefiting you, right? You're just getting on the other side of the problem. So it's shifted the problem, probably exacerbated it as well, but it doesn't solve the problem. I think technology solves problems. I don't think politics does at all. As far as broad strokes where I see it going politically is I still subscribe to the sovereign individual thesis that Bitcoin is going to demonetize the state, and we're going to see the collapse of the nation state as the dominant institutional paradigm. And we're going to have something like, we go from a world of 200 nation states to a world of 20,000 free city states. Now that could take 500 years, who knows? But I think the economics make sense. It's like you can't print money anymore, a la Bitcoin. Well, there's 50% of U.S. tax revenue in 2020 was printed money. So if federal tax goes down, tax collections go down 50%, and now their only means of revenue is explicit taxation. You have to send people a bill. Well, that's going to give people a lot more inspiration to vote with their feet, right? And go to jurisdictions where they're treated best and or taxed less. And presumably those people would have at least some of their purchasing power in the hyper-concealable, hyper-portable Bitcoin. So now that vote with their feet counts a lot more than it used to, right? It's one thing to leave Russia with $400 in your pocket. It's another thing to leave Russia with all of your purchasing power intact and go to a country that treats you better. Right. I'm just picking a random, I'm not saying Russia's the one, I was just going back to the collapse of Soviet Russia, and I've heard stories of people just escaping with literally just whatever they're wearing, basically. Yeah. Leaving it all behind and starting over.
Hiding gold in their clothes.
Coat hangers and all kinds of shit. Just doing whatever they could. But now in a world of Bitcoin, that calculus is way different.
Interesting. Going back to the Dunbar's number, is it possible that is the ideal governing size?
I mean, who knows?
Well, so what is the reason for the nation state? It's shared. Well, nation states, like nationalism in the 19th century, that was shared language, I think.
I mean, we had the shared language before the nation state. I think it's just, again, the sovereign individual's very strong thesis is that technology determines the profitability of violence, basically. And so when power can be projected over larger distances, you get larger, more centralized social forms of social organization. When power cannot be projected as efficiently, like in hilly country, for instance, you tend to have much more decentralization because it's hard to project your power across an uneven terrain. versus a very wide and even terrain.
How does it,
So as it relates to Bitcoin,
or even just like I guess wealth or quality of life? I mean, are those more fractured groups? Are they, do they have more friction in trade that results in lower wealth?
I don't know the answer to that one.
Because I'm just wondering, because I think, because I wonder if Bitcoin solves a problem where it's like, we were talking earlier about how it kind of, it goes down the middle between, like, for example, being a bearer asset, final settlement, but also high frequency. It's like, is this something where it's like, you could have smaller, more local governance because you have a technology that allows you to transmit value without trust to other communities.
I think that's
right. You
right.
no longer have to trust them.
Yeah. I think that's right.
Huh.
And again, to distinguish between like the state and government, it's that opt-in, opt-out. It's like if you can opt in and opt out with no consequences, that's a government, right? That's like even a homeowners association is like a micro government. But a state is not that. A state is something that exploits you, right? You can't even opt out. You try to opt out of the US tax regime, you have to pay the exit tax. So I think Bitcoin moves governmental structures and social organization closer to this opt-in, opt-out paradigm and further away from this tyrannical paradigm of nation statism.
Yeah.
Just giving people more options, basically, right? More negotiating leverage against the state. And that's power to the people. That's the ideal that is at the bedrock of constitutional republics, liberal democracy, the whole thing, right?
Yeah.
People should hold the power. Well, now, turns out purchasing power is one of the most important forms of power you can hold. And Bitcoin lets you hold that power in a way that other people can't take from you.
Yeah, that's well said. I like that.
One of my highest health priorities is keeping my brain in top shape. To take care of my brain power, I do many things, such as striving to read, write, exercise, and meditate daily. One of the latest tools in my brain power toolkit is MindLab Pro. MindLab Pro is a nootropic supplement that is scientifically proven to enhance your brain power. When I take MindLab Pro, my mind feels like it has a better grip on the world, my thinking is more lucid, and the articulation of my speech is radically improved. MindLab Pro has been tested in rigorous, double-blind, placebo-controlled human trials and has been proven to enhance brain power for users in every age group. MindLab Pro is an advanced formulation of 11 nootropic ingredients and is backed by research from over 1,400 human trials conducted over the past 32 years. So if you're looking to enhance your brain power, MindLab Pro is an excellent solution. Go to mindlabpro.com/breedlove to start enhancing your brain power today. Again, that's mindlabpro.com/breedlove. If you're listening to this podcast, you probably get it. You get that Bitcoin upends everything that state-sponsored schools teach us about money. For those who get the importance of Bitcoin, it is important that we have a smart way to buy and hold Bitcoin. My friends at Coinbits, the oldest Bitcoin-only exchange in the United States, have pioneered the concept of roundups, which converts your spare change into Bitcoin. Simply connect your credit or debit cards, and your usual purchases are rounded up to the nearest dollar, letting you stack sats on every purchase without even thinking about it. Coinbits also provides a terrific self-custody experience. Connect a hardware wallet for automatic withdrawals into cold storage to minimize your risk and stay sovereign over your Bitcoin. My favorite Coinbits feature is Coinbits Plus, which gives you the best exchange rate on Bitcoin. It even gives you real-time feedback on how well you are doing on your savings plan. With Coinbits Plus, power users can save more money to buy even more Bitcoin. All that, plus peer-to-peer cash and Bitcoin payments, target orders, price alerts, and more means Coinbits can help you do almost anything you need to do with Bitcoin. So go to Coinbits.app/breedlove to sign up today. Again, that is Coinbits, BITS.app/breedlove. You're writing a book.
I am. I'm working on something. Yes.
Are you disclosing the title of the book?
Yeah, we could talk about it.
Yeah.
It's called Abacus. And it's it's an exploration of how we've talked about this, how Bitcoin will fuel and assist in the development of a healthy economy that includes non-human agents and human agents. It's like fascinated by this idea of human action being limiting because it's only talking about humans. And if you change that to agent action, when you don't actually even know what's going on inside the reasoning apparatus of the agent, it's impossible to know except for the way that it manifests externally through behavior. Then what does that mean for kind of interpreting? Like, how do you reinterpret Austrian economics in that world?
Yeah.
And it's called Abacus because that was inspired by this concept of Bitcoin being this physical extension. It is an abacus at the scale of a planet.
Yeah.
That is, lightning is easy to visualize in that way.
Yes. Yeah.
And but an abacus is not just the concept of the physical scaffold, but it is a physical scaffold on which value is physically moved, representations of value. And so that I think is sort of a nice way to visualize Bitcoin as a physical apparatus. You could go to abacus.earth to sign up for updates on that.
We talked about this earlier, but like, why do you see Bitcoin as such an instrumental option, or let's say an instrumental component of the AI paradigm? Like, why is it so necessary?
Well, because if you have agents that are non-human and that are human, that are trying to coordinate their economic activity for efficiency, right? Like highest, best use of resources. Agents have to consume resources just like we do. And so they're going to have to trade something in exchange for the resources that they need to obtain from other agents or other people. And they're, again, you could have like a lower layer, a higher layer, whatever you would say, layer 2, layer 3, layer 4. You could have some kind of token, I suppose, that they're trading at high frequency, but that token will not be a bearer asset because the only digital bearer asset is Bitcoin. Right? Because the hardest money wins and so on. And so at some point...
But if they can settle quickly and frequently, then it can be as good as a digital bearer, almost as good as a digital bearer asset.
Yeah, but it is a form of credit until they do.
Sure.
So they're going to have to be able to access the Bitcoin network in order to participate in the global economy.
Yeah. I want to go back to something you said way earlier. We talked about this time locking of Bitcoin until you hit a certain block height. And then the use of these agents being able to transmit, send and receive Bitcoin or Bitcoin derivative, let's say. Could these then... You could almost create one of these LLMs as like your active will and testament in a way, right? Or it could be a foundation or a business or something that like outlives you. Or you can put some Bitcoin into it and give it some commands and say, this, it unlocks a certain amount of Bitcoin over time, and then it conducts these functions with it. I mean, do you think it gets that?
That's so cool.
Sci-fi?
That's so cool. It definitely does. Well, we're not quite there yet, but I think directionally LLMs have shown that they will be capable of not only passing the Turing test for a generic human, but passing the Turing test to imitate any person. It will be trivial to train an LLM on your own corpus of output in your life.
People are already doing this,
People are doing it.
Yeah.
So what you're saying is a fascinating idea that I hadn't thought of, which is like, could you as sort of an entity just continue operating in the economy after you die indefinitely?
Yeah, I mean,
with Bitcoin,
sort of, right?
Yeah,
at least whatever your wishes were at your time of death. I mean, I don't know. You could program.
Well, no, but I'm saying like, so imagine like, okay, let's say you make all your money as a writer. Could your agent just continue your work and just continue earning money for your estate, like for 500 years after you die? And maybe even adapting to changes in the culture.
That's so strange.
Yeah.
That's so strange. So then you'd start competing with, like Ernest Hemingway would still be writing, something like that. Like,
right.
man, I don't know. Like, I want to not believe that LLMs will ever get that good, that they'll just be as good as organic content, but it's already so close.
I think they will be. And also the output of Robert Breedlove agent will eventually be so much more than yours that than yours was, that it almost becomes like a footnote that we were ever here. Well, that's the whole, like Elon Musk talks about how like it really does seem like humanity was the bootloader for the operating system.
Yeah.
We're like the little bar as like the computer starting up.
Yeah.
And
it would also be interesting with that, if that was possible, like say, whatever, you're a famous author and then you load your corpus of work into an LLM and you tell it to go on writing books after your death and selling them. What if it was programmed to not expend, if it would just sell content and take in money, basically, and not spend any of the money, right? So it just becomes like a savings center in a way. Then it would be basically encouraging people to add to the productive output of the species, right? People go to work to earn money. They produce goods and services. Then they spend some of that money buying content from this LLM, but the LLM never spends the money. So it never subtracts from goods and services by spending. So it just actually would increase the productivity of the human race to the extent that it continues selling content and not spending its savings.
But why wouldn't spending result in
well, say it's just accumulating Bitcoin, right? I don't know, say it's selling a Bitcoin a year worth of content.
Okay.
And it just keeps stacking sats, right? By year 50, this thing's accumulated 50 Bitcoin.
Yeah.
But that's all goods and services that have been produced that are not being, this thing's never going to consume if it was programmed that way.
I see.
So then you have this like weird thing that just like, I don't know, produces content from pre-existing content, but then is increasing human productivity because it never consumes itself. Even though it's producing, it's not consuming.
But it would have to consume resources to keep writing.
Sure, marginally, right?
Yeah.
So the electricity or whatever, which is presumably way less than the 50 Bitcoin in this thought experiment. Say it took, I don't know, 10 basis points of the 50 Bitcoin to pay for the electricity to do the writing. But then the rest of it is just like goods and services produced but not consumed, which increases everyone's productivity.
But why would it do that?
I'm just saying you could program it that way.
Yeah.
That would be a big benefit to the human race, right?
I don't know if you could program it that way, though. I don't know. Maybe that's the assumption. I don't know.
Couldn't you just put it, the Bitcoin doesn't unlock until like an infinite block height?
Oh, I see what you're saying.
Or a near infinite block height?
But then the agent might stop doing it. I don't know. I don't know where the line is between like how much you can control, right?
Yeah. I don't know. I'm out on the fringes, but I was just thinking that would be an interesting way to like.
I'm just trying to poke a hole in it because I'm like, it does sound right, but maybe there's something.
But it all hinges on like, could this thing even produce novel content from pre-existing content that would be appealing to the market? I don't know.
Right. Well, it doesn't have to be pre-existing even. I mean, so it's so. The singularity is near. Have you read the Ray Kurzweil? I don't know if you know that.
Yeah, parts of it, not all.
I mean,
of it,
it's amazing how we haven't reached the singularity exactly, but we are now in sight of it in the sense that we really cannot say what will happen after we cross the event horizon. Yeah. And it's tough because it feels like kind of hitting a wall every time you try to think about how do I explain this to normies who are thinking about what to tell their kids to study in school. How do I explain this to, myself for like what I should do with my life? It's unknowable. Like I really feel like we're on the precipice of something. We just have to jump and have faith that, that we're going to fly. But it's there's this singularity. There's this sense that you can't keep reasoning past this point that we're almost at.
Yes.
And some say 28, some say 2030, some say 2035, but I mean, it's pretty soon.
Yeah, wasn't his original book 2035, but it keeps...
It was something like that. I think it might have been 2040, something like that. Yeah, it's pretty amazing when you think about it.
Yeah. Man, it's crazy. And it's the whole thing where yeah, you're right that the more change and the pace of change accelerates, the more myopic we become about what the future holds.
Yeah.
Right? It's like we're going up the exponential curve, basically. And the steeper that thing gets, the further, the lower your field of vision.
And you know what? That's really been destructive, I think, to people's ability to dream.
Yeah.
And dream big. Like, I want to be a this. I want to grow up and be this. Oh, well, that won't exist, right?
Yeah. Right. Right. You can't even.
It's too bad. But also, I do think that we are going to become a multi-planetary civilization in our lifetime. And I mean, the next step, whether it's agents or humans or both, probably both, is to settle the inner solar system, and eventually the outer. And that's the order of business, And so like we should be excited about the future. It's like it's going to be full of wonder and adventure. I kind of think that it's hard for people to accept because they're hitting this wall with AI and technology. I was having this conversation with a friend of mine a few years ago, and I was like, I mean, unless a catastrophe hits the human race such that like basically life stops, you can accept that most people, so we have like 8 billion people today, most humans that have the human experience will have it not on this earth. Like most of them will, because there's going to be a huge number of people that live after us.
Yeah.
Unless we all die, but I don't think it will happen. It's very unlikely. So most people not live on earth if you just put them all on the same playing field. It's like hard for people to accept, right?
Yeah.
They're like, wait, what do you mean? You know? But you just have to kind of like extrapolate the numbers out logically. And you can say things with, I mean, that's something that you can say with some amount of certainty, even though the future's unpredictable. What do you think?
You're saying that we will live off planet.
Well, for sure.
Really?
Yeah.
Why do you think you can say that with certainty?
Well, unless something bad happens where we can't leave.
Oh, so you're basically just saying, assuming we continue to exist for, call it 5 billion years, right? Till the sun turns into a red giant. Well, if we haven't gone off planet by then, then we will end.
Right. But it's very unlikely that will happen.
Yeah, because 5 billion years is an insanely long time.
But even just with geometric expansion of the human species, like even if we only existed for 10,000 more years,
right?
Most people that had ever lived in history will have not lived on Earth.
Yeah. Yeah, assuming we've jumped. But yeah, I don't know. Because the other thing, there's population growth slows apparently once we sort of cover a land mass mostly.
Oh, really?
So we might hit just like I think even our global population is expected to peak right around 10 billion, I think, and then start to go down towards the year 2100.
Yeah, I heard that too. I wonder why.
I don't know, dude. I don't know about the interplanetary stuff. I feel like there's so many problems to solve here. Like, I love the idea. Like, I've been obsessed with the stars and the cosmos my whole life, but it seems like we really need to get tightly unified and integrated here as a species before we can start handling problems of that magnitude.
Really? I think it solves problems, actually.
Going off planet.
I think we need a frontier. I mean, if you look historically, like when there has been a frontier, there has been like a flourishing of human thinking and, and new ideas and capitalism and entrepreneurship and invention. It's always when there's a frontier that, what it actually comes down to is that opt-out. When you make association with the people around you something that you're opting into instead of there's nowhere to go, then you suddenly have sort of open vistas to think, right? You can, even if you don't go, you have more of an imagination. That's my theory. You need a frontier. And maybe the reason we're all going crazy down here is because we've lost our frontier.
Lost the frontier.
There's nowhere to go.
I think it's a great point. And that's why I would say, we opt out of the Bank of England and the British Empire to become America. And then that opt-out continues across the North American continent, really culminating in the gold rush, right? That like the craziest of the crazies
Yeah.
The most
true.
out of the box, highest risk taking entrepreneurial people ended up on the West Coast. And then what ends up over there? Silicon Valley, right? We get all these.
That's an interesting connection I had not thought of.
And then so where I wanted to go was like, do you consider cyberspace to be a frontier? Or does it need to be physical space?
No, I think it needs to be physical. You have to be able to go there.
Yeah.
In a very literal sense. I mean, if you had very advanced interactive technology so that you could like really feel like you were in a different physical place in cyberspace. But the thing is, again, you wouldn't actually be. And so you would be, there's such a high dependency on other people and systems.
Yeah.
That I don't think it's pure enough to open your mind, you know?
Yeah.
Well, at least not what I've seen. I used to think that. I used to think it was virtual space was going to be this amazing, liberating place. Maybe it will be if we have Bitcoin, but it hasn't been so far.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that it can be overplayed, this whole idea of cyberspace is like the final frontier, because obviously you can't move into cyberspace, right? It's a different type of space.
Yeah.
But I am optimistic about, you know, a Bitcoinized version of cyberspace enabling people and populations to redistribute themselves in a way that maybe wasn't previously economically viable.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So now, you know, with Bitcoin mining, for instance, or you just go to anywhere there's cheap energy, you could build a town around it, basically. Right. And you could have Bitcoin mining as kind of a core industry for that town. So we could get populations that are much more widely distributed physically as a result of the innovation that occurs in cyberspace. That's very interesting to me. I don't know exactly how that will play out. But so it's less so about cyberspace being an actual frontier that you embark and go into, although you are, right? You're living and mediating more of your experiences through cyberspace. But that unlocks your ability to have more widely distributed populations in physical space on Earth. And then if we do that, well, then we have unlocked a lot of new territory. Because right now we're pretty concentrated, you know, along the water at the edges.
I heard that if you concentrated everyone in Texas at the what is it? It's the density of like LA. If Texas was just the density of LA, it could house all
the
people,
world population.
world
Something like that. I've heard that too.
Yeah.
Fascinating.
That is wild.
Yeah, there's also, I saw this, there's a circle that you can draw in India and China. Covers like 6% of the Earth's surface, but it contains 50% of the world's population.
Yeah.
That's pretty fascinating.
Yeah.
I've never been there, but I just could just imagine this is a totally different planet.
East Asia?
Yeah.
Yeah,
China
it is.
and
I've been
India.
there. I've been to China and Japan and South Korea. It is. It's and there is it's like a big American city, but you have to kind of give yourself over to being one of 7 of 9. You know, it's hard to find physical distance. I like Tennessee because I like to feast my eyes upon emptiness.
Yes.
I know that sounds weird, but it really affects me. It's like as I get older, things like the weather and things like my surroundings affect me a lot more.
Yeah.
And I love looking at nothing.
Yeah.
No people, no buildings.
Yeah.
It's just like it feels like drinking fresh water to me.
For sure. It's good for the brain.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think people need frontiers, man. I think
Yeah.
and I think Mars it's going to suck at first because you're going to have to live underground and so on, but from a sensory perspective, space is not compelling. That's why I think a lot of people don't want to go. But maybe virtual space will help solve that.
Yeah.
You know, maybe you'll be able to live on a physical frontier with some of the sensory experience of Earth.
Yeah. Yeah, maybe. Maybe we'll figure out some of this. You know, like I do my infrared sauna, and maybe we'll get to some point where we have artificial sunlight, and then people that are living underground that have newly colonized Mars will have something that feels like Earth, I guess.
Yeah.
What is this? Can you explain this idea of constructed value, and why? What is that, and why does it matter for Bitcoiners?
Oh, sure. This goes back to the book. I'm just developing this concept. So you have all these theories of value and schools of economics. I've been trying to go outside Austrian because an author wrote this thing that I thought had a lot of value in it, which is that like in kind of economic systems or schools, there's this tendency to instead of try to describe the world, to try to defend your position. And I'm trying to like not do that. So I've been reading a lot about different schools of value and different economic or theories of value in different economic schools. And nothing really like struck me as suitable for like an AI powered economy because again, because the intentions, because we now have economic agents to which we can't assume shared intentions. At least if I could say value is subjective, that means, well, I am a human. If the economy is made up of humans, I can sort of impart through empathy, like what it would be like to be you, right? But if you can't do that with the vast majority of economic activity, like what can you really say? So constructed value is the concept that value is constructed at the moment of transaction. I'm really thinking about these like high frequency transactions, and maybe the goal of any kind of like economic policy or technology, maybe the goal is really just to eliminate friction to transaction, because the more transactions you have, the more efficiency you have, and the more
revealing of consumer preferences.
The more revealing of preferences, right? So you want to literally maximize that to like the highest number per second that you can.
Yeah.
And so any kind of like policy about, what people should be allowed to do or what agents should be allowed to do or how taxes work, it should always be tuned to minimize friction, maximize frequency. And then like that, and then value is at the moment of transactions constructed at like a very, granular micro scale. And you can then study the aggregates of that, but without really knowing, perhaps not really knowing the reasoning that went into like the micro transaction.
The pricing system and how, like, we're talking about how money coordinates. I drew on the metaphor, right, of the conductor orchestrating the symphony, basically, right?
Yeah.
Money kind of serving the role of the conductor, and the players in the symphony being free market actors, something like that. But the amount of data compression that the pricing system provides is so mind-boggling. Like, it's just, all you need to do is see a number change. I always use the example of copper, which I think that was in Safeteen's book. I think originally it's like the price of, there's a copper mine collapses in South America. All the market participants in the world that are involved with copper, they just see the number go up, right? Because supply went down, demand was constant, so price of copper goes up. Now, worldwide, there's an incentive to produce more copper, right? Because the price went up, and to consume less or delay consumption or use substitutes. So you've now propagated this incentive worldwide to all market participants concerned with copper to alleviate the shortage that was created from the collapse of the copper mine.
Yes.
The data compression and propagation of that is so radical. Like, I don't think there's anything else like that.
You're right.
And that's what's coordinating people, right? Again, that's how you get self-interest aligned to collective interest.
Yes.
In an actual, like in a real way, right?
Yeah.
No communist rhetoric, no bullshit, no.
And also with persuasion as opposed to coercion.
With persuasion instead of coercion, right? No, from each according to their ability, to each according to their need. Like, everyone pursuing their own self-interest.
Yeah.
And following their own aims.
Yeah.
Creates this symphony of collaboration that resolves our biggest problems without even thinking about it, right? Like, people don't need it. They don't even need to know about the mine. No one needs to know that at all. They just need to know price went up 40%. Act accordingly.
Yeah.
And that's incredible to me. Like, that blows my mind.
Yeah.
And so I wonder, like, again, back to high frequency.
Yeah.
Really high frequency transactions. But the problem with high frequency, like, fiat currency is high frequency. But the problem is it's divorced from final settlement, so you get all the problems with fiat, right? So you need high frequency final settlement, basically. So I wonder what that is going to do for price discovery and the propagation of this data that fiat distorts and destroys and all the above.
And you almost need agents to manage it because prices will be changing so fast that it will be very frustrating almost, right? Like imagine. Well, I guess you would go to the supermarket and your gallon of milk maybe would be like $3.
A dynamic price on it.
It would be dynamic, and only the very, very last decimal places would be vibrating.
Yeah.
And then maybe sometimes it would.
Yeah.
But
that's interesting to think about. Dynamic real-time pricing.
well, also so Amazon does this, right?
Oh.
So I don't know if they got caught doing it. I don't know if they still do it, but like they will. And so this is actually an interesting question for like for somebody who's like into like Austrianism and efficient markets, because it's like if you profile somebody, you can guess what they would be, what a good would be value to them as opposed to others, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then because they don't have access to the prices that is being displayed to others, so that's what they were doing. They were profiling people's spending behaviors. They probably could, do some digging and figure out how much income you have or whatever. And then they would price goods to you at a number that they were guessing you'd be willing to pay. And then if it didn't work, they would reduce it so that next time you loaded the page, it would be different. You'd be like, oh, wow, the price went down. No, it just went down for you because you didn't buy it last time.
And that's probably, it has its own inducement effect too, right? When you see the price go down.
Yeah. Or up. But isn't that kind of like, why do you feel like instinctively, I feel like that's evil?
Yeah.
But it's actually like it's not actually evil, right? It's like,
well, it's a centralization problem again.
okay.
It's the fact that Amazon has that information asymmetry that they can exploit, both in terms of knowing the consumer and profiling them, and then also displaying pricing only to specific consumers. Where if Amazon were a decentralized price setting place, that presumably you wouldn't have that asymmetry, right? There would just be
It's like
the price on offer, just like an actual market exchange. Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So a marketplace requires neutrality as to the buyer.
Ideally, I think so. I mean, again, devil's in the details, right? You have these dark pools on Wall Street and all of this stuff, and obviously the regulations distort this. You have to know your customer, and 1099s if you send them more than $600, blah blah blah, all these things.
Yeah.
But I think ideally you just want to be satisfying the customer want, better, faster, cheaper, whoever customer is, right? When you start getting into this game of like, oh, let me treat customer A different than customer B, different than customer C, then it does get asymmetric and manipulative, in my opinion.
Yeah. So it is.
But it's a consequence of centralization again. So I don't know that.
Yeah. And privacy, right? It's a know your customer problem.
It's another one of those problems where the government would want to step in and pass some laws and regulate it, but like it's just going to make it worse.
Right.
Whereas the actual solution is decentralization, not centralization.
Right. Yeah. Fascinating.
So, okay, we've been all over the map here.
It's fun.
It is fun. I want to try to find out where to bring this thing home. Just Bitcoin adoption.
Mm-hmm.
It's a lot of fun. We sit here, we talk about Bitcoin, we talk about all of its implications, the philosophy of Bitcoin, surrounding Bitcoin, et cetera. But are most people going to care about that?
No. This is definitely
not.
Inside baseball.
Yeah, 1% of 1%, maybe. I don't know, maybe 1%.
Yeah.
Will care about all of these intricacies. So do you think is this even useful for Bitcoin adoption, or is it just a matter of flat out usability?
I think usability. It's hard because you have to exit this system and opt out of something that doesn't want you to leave. So you have to scale the Berlin Wall of KYC and fiat and everything to get into Bitcoin. So that there's a limited amount that people who are designing apps can do. Mm-hmm. And I do think there's value in doing that. I'm not one of these people that believes you should try to go around it. but adoption is the name of the game. And I think that Bitcoin is not as widely adopted as a lot of Bitcoiners believe that it is. And that's what we think about a lot. I mean, we try to make, like I work for Coinbits, and we try to make our app as easy to use as possible for newcomers. We want them to have a good experience with Bitcoin that is very familiar to them. And there's always a balance. So like, okay, let's back up. So I used to help design musical instruments. I have a background in music, but also interaction design for expressive interfaces, things that,
Interesting.
like by artists or musicians, like what is it about one instrument that makes it something that you could practice every day for decades and get better at, and another instrument is a toy and you just learn how to use it and you never get better. And so there are actual physical properties of these interfaces that make that true. So you can like unpack that, and then you can use that to design apps or whatever you want. And there's this concept that I think is incredibly useful, which is the ideal interface has a low barrier to entry, but a high ceiling on virtuosity. So what that means is, so
easy to learn, hard to master.
Yeah, not just hard to master, because you don't have to make it hard. It's just that continuing to use it unlocks new abilities.
Gotcha.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So like, piano, you can like walk up to piano. You've never played it before. In a few minutes, you can play a melody that you have in your head that you've heard before. You could like plunk it out, right? So it has a very low barrier to entry in some sense, but has very high ceiling of virtuosity. You could like play it every day for decades and never find the end, never solve it as a game.
Sure.
A violin has a pretty high barrier to entry. You can't pick it up, you don't even know what to do with it, and you try to make a sound with it and it sounds like garbage, right? So it's like harder to get started, but then you can also play it forever. And then the example of like the opposite of all of that is the computer mouse. It has a very low barrier to entry, but then like you never get better at using a mouse. You use it every day. You're moving something, you're using gesture to control, but it never gets better. And in fact, even if you try to use that mouse to like play some kind of instrument on the screen, because of the gestures that it affords you, you'll never be a virtuoso.
Yeah.
So there's these properties. So we think about that when we're designing Bitcoin experiences. Like we want it to be very low barrier to entry. Get your first Bitcoin. You have to scale KYC, but you get your first Bitcoin very quickly. You see it. You're now a Bitcoiner. You can start to identify yourself as that. And then there's more and more to do, right? So things like learning personal financial management, connecting your hardware wallet, learning how to use a hardware wallet, which is a whole thing. I think there's like a limited, I think you have to think of it in terms of that journey and being a guide, as opposed to, I think there's a lot of ideas in the Bitcoin design world that the complexity of Bitcoin has to be beaten out of these experiences. But that, I don't believe in like hiding complexity, Don Norman is this design guru. He has a great book called Living with Complexity. And the pictures of, the cockpit of an airplane, of a fighter jet, let's say, right? You're not going to like with beautiful Apple-like design, like make that not complicated.
Yeah.
But the reason it's complicated is because your jet can do a lot of cool stuff.
That's right.
So you have to learn it. So it's like you have to become a virtuoso.
Yes.
And so Bitcoin's like that. It's like, Bitcoin addresses are like these long strings of intimidating characters. It's like, you're going to have to present that to people and take them along and hold their hand. But like you shouldn't hide that.
Yeah.
The way assigning flow works, all those things. So that's what we think about a lot. I think there's a lot to do there. It's actually gotten a lot better recently, frankly. The Bitcoin design group, they do good work, open source design patterns and so on. But that's sort of how we approach Coinbits as well.
Yeah.
And we also think about it in terms of like, at the very beginning, there's this concept like you have to shape the path. If you want somebody to change their behavior, you have to make it as easy as possible for them to do that. And so what one of the things you can do, you can be like, you have to walk down this path by yourself, but I'm going to use a machete to cut out all the vegetation and make it like paved for you. So it's like nice, so you can walk nicely. So the thing that Coinbits does, roundups, right? It's like this concept you probably know from Acorns. You round up your spare change and save it in Bitcoin. So it does one extra thing that other Bitcoin accumulation functions don't do, which is take away the choice that you have to make of how much you need to buy. And that's also tied into like this unit bias problem that people have. Oh, Bitcoin's too expensive. Hear it all the time. I know that comes up all the time.
Yeah.
So, and so then you're frozen. You're like, Bitcoin's too expensive. Or maybe you do listen to this podcast and you buy into all the philosophy. And then you're like, well, wait, like, should I, Saylor's telling me to sell a kidney and mortgage my house. Like, should I do that? And if I don't do that, should I just do nothing? And it becomes like, we get so intense about this stuff that I think it causes people to freeze. So what we've done with roundups is just like, you link your card, you don't have to decide how much to buy. And just that one decision being removed helps you walk that path. Later on, when you're ready, again, there's more functionality that's sort of like
Can you set the round up to the nearest $1, $10, stuff like that?
You can round up to the nearest dollar. You can multiply it then by a number if you want to do more.
Gotcha.
That's how you do it. Yeah.
Gotcha.
And you can also set up a regular DCA.
Yeah.
But that's not that's just not what we do. Like first, you do that later, because when you're ready to decide how much you want to save per month, people get really sketchy about how much they want to put aside per month. And they get really, there's also what I've noticed mainly actually, and I say this with a lot of grace, but like with a lot of like older people, middle-aged to older, like Gen X to boomers, there's a aversion to losing any amount of money because it reflects poorly on you. So it's like, well, why wouldn't you just, if you're not sure about Bitcoin, why wouldn't you just do like $20 a month? You won't even notice. And it's like, well, because I would feel stupid if I lost it, or I'd feel like, or if Bitcoin turned out to be hacked, then what have I wasted my money on? It reflects poorly. So we're always trying to kind of like make things feel comfortable and approachable. I think approachability is something Bitcoin designers could do a lot more with.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
No, that's an interesting point, because in that attempt to, I guess, steer clear of failure or whatever it is, what do you think they're trying to avoid? And that is looking bad? Like if they invest $20 a month in Bitcoin and Bitcoin goes to zero, they're worried about looking bad, or what? Because they're not worried about the financial impact.
No. It's like, I didn't do it right. I didn't. I don't really like technology in the first place.
Yeah.
And I didn't. Now I'm being told I didn't do it right and I messed something up. There's even like, with really like the older generation who for whom they learned computers when they were grown-ups.
Yeah.
They're worried that if they push the wrong button, everything will be erased, right? They have this thing that was beaten into them from when they were young, when that probably was true.
Sure.
And so there's just a lot of hesitation.
Yeah.
So it's hard.
Yeah, it is. And I do have a lot of sympathy, because, I'm 39. I don't know how old you are, but I sort of grew up with computers. Like, when I was very young, we first started to get computers in our school. And then by the time I'm in middle school, we all had computers. So sort of grew up with them. And even I'm not fully comfortable with them, there's kind of this glimmer in my mind of a time before computers and before smartphones. Like I didn't really get a smartphone until my early 20s, I guess. And now kids today, it's like they don't have that recollection of a time before. So they're like fully bought into these things and trust them. So my slight degree of distrust gives me sympathy for people that didn't grow up with it at all. Yes. Like if these things appeared when I was in my 50s, I'd be like, yeah, I'd be distrustful too. Yeah. Give me my rotary phone back or whatever the thing is. Yeah. So I try to have a little bit of humility with that, but there's also frustration, when you're just, oh, you think the dollar's safe? Like, come on, dude. Like, you clearly haven't done any reading.
Yeah. Well, it's melting.
Yeah.
But
also unsafe too. Like,
don't say more.
Well, it can be censored, reversed, seized, frozen, all the things. And, all it takes is, well, who knows what it takes these days. It was
Right.
participation in the Canadian Freedom Trucker Rally was enough to cause those actions to be taken against people.
Yes.
People operating in a liberal democracy, exercising their views, which is what a democracy is supposed to do, all of a sudden justified the freezing and censoring and all these things of their bank accounts. So
that was hopefully one of those incidents that woke more people up than it damaged.
I think so.
But I'm even seeing things like, it's not news to you, but there are people you walk into your bank and you just be like, you don't know anything about my politics. I just would like my money, please.
Yeah.
And they will pretty much start
inform,
throwing couches in front of the door to prevent you from leaving.
Yeah.
It's
even
wild.
for me, sending wire transfers online, and you're getting these questions like for not even, $7,000 wire transfers. They're like, who is this? What is it for?
Because they don't.
Where is the invoice? I'm like, are you kidding me? Like, this is
Right.
What happened to private property? You're taking the private right out of property. It's not property. It's not private.
No, and it's and there's this mentality. I mean, that is the government, right? It's not really your bank's fault. It's just that the government has outsourced law enforcement to the financial companies, which is very unfair.
Yeah,
and,
very unfair, and unfortunate that people, you typically need to feel that pain before they start to understand that Bitcoin's not just some speculative thing that you throw a few dollars in and hope it moons.
Yeah.
We've probably done ourselves, not we, but Bitcoin culture has done itself a disservice through a lot of this Lambo and moon language, which it's less prevalent today, but 10 years ago it was pretty heavy-handed.
I remember that. I mean, I always thought of it as more of a crypto thing. Bitcoin was guilty too, I guess.
Yeah. Early days of Bitcoin was very much in that. So, dude, this has been an awesome, wide-ranging philosophical discussion.
I had a great time. I love it because I'm usually alone with my thoughts. I don't have somebody.
This is another great thing about Bitcoin is that it brings a lot of loners together.
Yeah.
And which is interesting. Yeah, especially when you get a bunch of people together at a conference and it's just like a lot of people are just so excited to be able to talk to other people that share their views. And,
isn't that cool? Yeah. Isn't it cool that Bitcoin is almost it's something that when you have it in common with somebody, you know something about them. And you'll get along with them in some sense. It's very cool.
It's very much like a religion in that sense, at least.
Shared values.
Yeah. You just have shared values out of the gate, and then you can immediately get to some substantive conversation rather than where are you from? What do you do? What do you like? What are your politics? You just kind of know, well, they're probably libertarian. They're definitely into sound money, probably entrepreneurial, probably don't like centralized power structures. And, you just kind of get to the meat of an interesting conversation much more quickly. Yeah. Which is cool.
It's super cool, man.
Oh.
Yeah. I'm really happy we did this.
Yes, me too.
I have to plug Coinbits. So you got to go to Coinbits.app to sign up for Coinbits. And I would really love to hear your feedback. We're really product driven. So we talk to users every week. So, definitely give me your feedback, reach out to me directly and tell me what your experience is like. And we move really fast. So.
Yeah, you guys do. And I've appreciated that about working with you so far. You guys were even taking my feedback early on as I was onboarding and just making changes. Yeah. And that was cool. It's cool to see the agility in action. And then also just one more comment on the roundups thing. Yeah. I don't for me particularly, I don't know that I don't know. I say this as someone who hasn't made use of it, so I shouldn't even maybe be rendering my opinion, but I think it's really useful for a certain group of people. The people that you get this assurance basically that the more frequently you're spending, the more frequently you're also saving, right? It's kind of like an offset to your spending habits. Yeah. Right. And that's probably really good for a large cohort of people. I'm less of I don't like shopping, frankly. So I'm not much of I like to buy nice things, but I like to get in and get out.
Yeah.
But people that are actually spending frequently, like being your more normal consumer, that seems like a really useful feature just to keep them saving as consistently as they're spending.
We say we tax your high time preference spending for yourself.
Yes.
You can set your own tax policy for yourself.
Yeah.
Actually, so we linked these cards, right, for the roundups, but then we realized, okay, you've opted into this where you've linked your cards. Well, in order to do our roundups, we have to see your transactions, obviously.
Yeah.
So we have that. So now what we've done is we built something called Spending Insights. So we categorize low time preference and high time preference spending behaviors. So you can kind of see how you're doing as a Bitcoiner.
That's cool. That is really cool. Yeah, Dave, man, thank you so much for coming to Miami and doing this. This is very fascinating. I appreciate the AI insights. I'm like totally focused on learning more about that right now.
Yeah.
And it's seems like another one of those rabbit holes that you can just unleash your curiosity like Bitcoin. So where else, you mentioned Coinbits, but like where else can people find out about you specifically and your work?
Oh, sure. I think the best would be to follow me at Contrary Mo on X. Trying to get some followers. And I'm at davebirnbaum.com if you want to really see my portfolio. But I would go to Coinbits.app. If you're interested in the book, abacus.earth. And yeah, just leave it there.
Awesome.
So thank you. And beautiful, beautiful studio. I'm enjoying Miami. I've never been here before.
Oh, nice.
I've been to Miami Beach,
but
never Miami itself. And it's a really wonderful city. So
yeah, good weather.
Thanks for having me.
Especially for wintertime visitor from Tennessee. Yeah, lovely having you. And we'll put all that in the show notes. So
Cool.
Thanks again.
Thank you.
Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this episode, click here to find more just like it, and here to find our most recent episode. Also, make sure to like this video to help shine light on the corruption of money, and be sure to subscribe to this channel to stay connected.